Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Rich Steve Beck. A huge welcome to Produce, Mix, Fix and Conquer. We are so pumped and so excited to have our next guest come and join us today. So our next guest, he is in the amazing band Julian-K. He's also in Orgy. He was in Dead by Sunrise with Chester Bennington and legendary band Rough Cut. Our guest has also engineered and mixed and produced bands such as Coal Chamber, Eels and Spineshank. He's also worked on music for Hollywood films such as Freaky Friday and Underworld. Ladies and gentlemen, Amir. How you doing, Amir?
Hey, good. How are you?
Really good, thanks, man. Super excited to have a chat with you. We said this before we started the interview, but that wall behind you, man, it looks incredible. Looks great.
Yeah, it's kind of my throwback to the old music moguls when you would go into their offices and they had, this big ominous wall of gold and platinum records to intimidate you.
Yeah.
I call it my wall of shame.
Oh, it's so cool, man. Some great stuff behind you. So let's let's begin right at the beginning like we have with our previous guests, if that's good with you, where your journey started. So what bands did you listen to as a kid? What music did you grow up on?
I guess when I really first started listening to music, my cousin, who's an amazing piano player, James, we were both really into kind of electronics and music. I was really fortunate to, because I didn't really grow up with any siblings. So he was kind of like my older brother. And luckily he loved everything like that I did. Like we were really lucky because back then, a lot of kids weren't into electronics or music or whatever, like the way that we were. Yeah. And so we actually listened to kind of a lot of prog rock. That was some of our early stuff, like Genesis and Yes and Rush and, pretty out there kind of music. And as he started to learn keyboards, I started to learn guitar. And so I started listening to a lot more metal. So it was like Judas Priest and Thin Lizzy. And I was really into Jeff Beck and UFO and like Michael Schenker. And Alan Holdsworth, which is also kind of an odd one. But again, I liked some of that really bizarre fusion music really early on, which is very strange, I think.
That's cool. That's so cool. But maybe that kind of bit is that maybe kind of develop your taste now to like where you're at, like kind of all that music that you listened to as a kid. Is that maybe parts of which we'll talk about it more maybe in a few minutes? Is that helped develop your playing style, listening to all these incredible artists back when you were a kid?
Oh, it definitely did, because I was listening to, the Scorpions and Uli John Roth and Michael Schenker, and I was also listening to like Alan Holdsworth and Jeff Beck. Yeah. And it's like, like Holdsworth and Beck were very, they were always pushing the limits and doing all these different things and merging all these styles of music. And I think that's always stuck with me, is that sort of melting pot idea of how you create music. Whereas maybe, Thin Lizzy, Scorpions, UFO, maybe a little more traditional, kind of retro rock, but with like these guitar heroes, But I always liked their solos, like really any of them except for maybe Holdsworth. Well, even Holdsworth was pretty melodic at times, but I always preferred that sort of melodic approach to guitar solos where you almost write a song as a solo. It's so memorable. It's like, when you listen to Rock Bottom by UFO and you listen to Schenker's solo, I mean, you could probably sit here, I don't know about you, but I can remember that solo. I know it note for note in my head. It's like a song in itself. And that was always a big influence on how I played guitar solos, even to this day. I just like that kind of melodic approach.
You can hear that in a lot of the music that you've done over the years as well. It's like, I know that a lot of the music that you've done has been super heavy, but then you can hear a lot of melody in there as well, right? The beat songs that you've written, it's so cool. So with the instruments, pleasure, man, absolute pleasure. I know that you're famous for playing guitar, and I know that you're a massive guitar nerd and you enjoy building guitars as well.
Yes.
But what did you pick up first? Did you pick up guitar first as a kid, or did you pick up keyboard? Tell us the story about the
Well, yeah, it goes back to my cousin again. I really wanted a mini Moog or a micro Moog when they first came out. I remember going to Guitar Center and playing with it and just being like, "Oh my God, this is this is amazing! Like, I can't believe all these crazy sounds I can do with this." But I just didn't have the money. I was too young. I didn't have the money to do it, and so he was older and had a job, and he ended up buying a micro Moog. So he kind of beat me to it. And so that's when I thought, well, maybe I'll just play guitar then. And so I started on guitar first, but there was always this little connection with synthesizers, even from the very beginning. My cousin would go to work and I would sit and plug in a cassette tape recorder to his micro Moog. And I would just sit there and make noises and do all this stuff. And then when he would come home, I'd put the tape on and we would just sit there. This is what kind of nerds we are. We would just sit there and listen to all this stuff that I did. And he was always like, I can't believe you did. How did you do all of that? Like, what were you doing? And I was just like, I don't know. I was just messing with it. I didn't even know how to play keyboards or anything. But we would just sit there and just nerd out on it. But yeah, I think there was always that double connection from the very beginning, or it's almost a triple connection because it's electronics, synth music, and guitar, music as well. All kind of was there from the beginning.
Incredible. So tell us about your transition to then starting to play guitar in bands. So I know that you grew up in San Diego, if that's right.
Yes.
Yeah. So how old were you when you moved over to LA? Yeah. Tell us the story about how all that happened.
Well, it happened very quickly. I had only started playing guitar when I was 16.
Yeah.
I was nerding out on electronics probably starting around 10 or 11 years old. Like I was fixing my mom's TV, which was tube, and doing all these crazy electronic experiments. So it was there from a very young age, but the music part of it didn't really kick in until I was later in my teens. And I got my first guitar for my birthday, and I actually had a guitar teacher try to teach me how to play, and he quit because he said I didn't have what it took. And then I taught myself in about a year. And by the time I was out of high school, I was already pretty good. It was weird. And I was in a couple local bands, but I knew that I had to go to LA because at that time, that's when Motley Crue, Rad, all these bands were blowing up out of LA. So I knew I needed to move to LA if I was ever going to do anything. And I was just putting that kind of out there and had it in my head that one way or another, this is going to happen. And I ended up getting really lucky. This band that I actually liked, that was a local band called Rough Cut, they were not signed at the time. Their guitar player, Jakey Lee, left to go play with Ozzy. And so all their guitar players had come, and most of the band came from San Diego, like Rat. So they came down to San Diego looking for a guitar player, and through a music store that we all used to hang out with called Guitar Trader, they found me. And I was the last guy they auditioned the day that they came down. And I ended up getting the gig nearly on the spot. And I drove to LA that night with my gear and auditioned the next day for Ronnie James Dio and Wendy Dio. No pressure there.
No.
Literally in one day I had to learn all these songs. Some of them I already knew because I was so in tune with the scene in LA that I even had demo tapes for all the bands that weren't even signed, like Rough Cut.
Yeah.
So I actually even knew some of their material, funny enough. But I ended up doing that and I got the gig, and the rest is history. That's what got me to LA. That was it, just like that. But there was a matter of time. I mean, it didn't happen overnight. There was probably a good year or so that I was still in San Diego, really trying to figure out how I was going to get to LA.
Yeah.
And you know, so it was about a year of just kind of really, it was, I don't know, pure luck, or it was just meant to happen that they found me, you know. And once that opportunity came knocking, that's one thing I always tell everybody I had to learn sometimes the hard way, is that, you know, when those opportunities come along, you have to go.
Yeah.
There's no hesitation. You know, if it's something that you want to do, you got to, you know, I immediately grabbed it and just went, because I knew, you know, this was my chance.
That's incredible. And was this the time period, so with Rough Cut, that you started to go into studios, obviously, to record?
Yes.
And is this when you started to get the studio bug as well, when you started looking around at all the gear? So tell us about your first time in the studio with Rough Cut and what you learned during that time period.
Yep. Well, I had already been kind of experimenting. I didn't have multi-tracks, but I had cassette recorders, and everything I was doing back then, I was always recording. So there was something there very early on. I just didn't realize it yet, you know, that I wanted to do this kind of stuff. But once I got in the studio with our first Rough Cut record, we ended up having Tom Allum and Mark Dodson, who you recently had on your show.
Yeah.
They were the team that did our record, and they had also done like Loverboy, Y&T, wait, sorry, I'm having a blank here.
That's cool, man.
It was Judas Priest, Loverboy, Y&T, and Crocus. Those were all the records that they had done right around that time.
Yeah.
So they were kind of a perfect match for Rough Cut, being this sort of dark metal band. And we went into the record plant, Studio C, which is a very famous studio. It's in the Spinal Tap movie. It's a big room. They had probably one of the first SSL, I'm guessing it was probably a G, I guess, back then. Nice. But it was probably one of those magical SSL 4000s. And I was just enamored by everything. You know, like I had no idea. I'd never been really in a studio, and this was state of the art. And we were doing, you know, they had 2 tape machines locked up together. So we were doing 48 tracks analog. And then, of course, all the amazing outboard gear. I always remember the Publison harmonizer that they were using, and the AMS reverbs, delays. I think there was also a pitch, I forget what that's called, but there was like a pitch version of the AMS. And they were both so gracious, because they could tell, I think, that I was really, really interested. And, you know, I would be like, you know, I'd look at this giant SSL board, and I was just like, I don't understand. Like, how can you guys, how do you know what all this does?
Yeah.
And they were like, I just remember this very clearly. They were the first ones that said this to me. I don't know if it was Mark or if it was probably Mark.
Yeah.
And he said to me, look, mate, you just got to look at this one channel. If you know this strip here, then you know the whole fucking thing. And I was like, oh, okay, this isn't so hard after all. So there's a compressor, there's this, there's, you know, and you learn this one little channel, and it's like, oh, they're all the same. And then you have a master channel. I'm like, wow, okay, that's cool. And they would actually let me tweak stuff, you know, like I would let them, you know, he would do something and he would say, look, you want to see what this does or whatever? And I would push the button, or I'd turn the knob, and I'd be like, oh, wow, fuck, that's cool. Like, it's so powerful. What a tool. I had no idea, you know. And then they would show me these tricks. I mean, obviously I could ramble about this forever, but those guys had like bags of tricks like you would not believe. I mean, some of that stuff has stuck with me for so many years. But I mean, we did so many, you know, backwards things, and they tape flanged where they would, you know, literally have the 2 machines, you know, I mean, full real tape flange.
That's cool.
Yeah. I remember they did this one trick that they were doing a lot back then, which was sampling the snare into the AMS and then tuning it down and then mixing that in with the snare that was there. And that's why those, like, especially on Judas Priest, like the snare is like, right? And then later they started mixing in the Simmons, because the Simmons almost kind of sounds the same. You would tune it down and mix in with the regular snare, the right, to make the snare just massive. So there was just, I mean, again, just so many magic tricks that they had that a lot of those have stuck with me over the years, you know.
Incredible. As I know Mark, when he was on a few weeks ago, he said about using newspaper as well. I think like using like newspapers in the drums or something that I think in the snare, or something along those lines. But it's like kind of all these different cool tricks that now you just like, I suppose maybe people starting to learn production and mixing now, they just won't know. They won't know all those cool, crazy tricks, you know, that you know, like you guys are pulling off back then. You know, it's insane, man. It's incredible.
Well, you know, I was lucky to be a part of the transition from analog to digital.
Yeah.
Unlucky in some ways because the beginnings of digital were not great.
Yeah.
It was actually quite difficult to make it sound good for many years. You know, we did a lot of stuff where they were like these hybrid records. Like when I did the Red Tape record, it's probably a record you might not be familiar with, but it's one of the favorite records I've ever done. It was like this punk band from Sacramento, punk hardcore kind of band.
Yeah.
You have to look for the record because it's not online, and it's one of the first records I ever did pretty much solely myself for Roadrunner. But that was kind of a hybrid record where I actually tracked a lot of the stuff. Initially, I think we tracked the drums on tape, and then the rest we did in Pro Tools. But you know, like the very first, let's see, like the Cold Chamber record would have all been analog. I think the first Spineshank album was also all analog, which is pretty cool. And then but like the Eels record, which I actually did before that, we did, crazy enough, because I worked with the Dust Brothers basically on that record, which was amazing.
Nice.
I became very good friends with Mike Simpson, and that's a funny story that ties back around to, this way, Freaky Friday, because we ended up working again on that, which is crazy. But yeah, that album was a very interesting hybrid because as the Dust Brothers, they had these Mac computers loaded up with all these samples and loops and stuff like what they used on the Beastie Boys album, right? Like the second Beastie Boys album. So a lot of that stuff came out of Mike's Mac, where he had a way, I don't know what he was using, but he had a way to generate these loops and things, which was a big part of that first Eels record, which I keep getting thrown off, but you have to point the opposite direction to do it. But yeah, that record. So that was an interesting record because we actually recorded that on ADATs. Remember those ADAT?
Yeah, man. Yeah, I do.
Yeah, so it was a combination of this computer sampling and then recording onto 24 tracks of ADAT. So it was a really interesting time because, like I said, you know, I started out kind of in the tape analog world and then got thrown into all these different situations where it was like Sony 48 track digital, right? And then there were ADAT tapes and there were Tascam D88s. I hated those.
Really?
They were like the worst. I had so many bad things happen on those. The ADAT tapes were actually fine. Like those were great. I never had issues with those. But those D88s, I never, I loathe those machines.
You're glad to see the back of them.
Yeah, what?
You're glad to see the back of them then?
Yeah. And then, you know, the transition of like Pro Tools and Logic and all this stuff that started coming in that we started using on the early Orgy records. I mean, we can get into that whenever, but those first two records were very hybrid in a lot of different ways of how we recorded and did all of that stuff too.
Incredible. So yeah, let's talk about Orgy then, man. So how did that, so you were in Rough Cut, and was there a time period leaving Rough Cut to working with Orgy? Because to be fair, I mean, you completely reinvented yourself as well, and Orgy was a completely different animal to Rough Cut as well. So tell us about the origins of Orgy, and tell us about maybe the transition from Rough Cut to Orgy.
Well, there were some other projects, obviously, in between Rough Cut and Orgy. And even before Orgy was when I started my career as an engineer. There was a certain point where I was really struggling, to be honest. I'd been in a lot of bands, had some notoriety, but really not success. You know, like I was still living in an apartment. I was still like struggling, honestly.
Wow.
And I got to a point in my life where I was just like, God, I don't know if I want to be in a band anymore. Like, I'm really over this. I mean, I traveled the world many times over with a lot of the bands that I had been in previously, including Rough Cut.
Yeah.
Sorry, just so you guys know, I've been fighting a cold this week, so my voice is a little hoarse. So forgive me for that.
That's cool.
Anyway, yeah, I was really kind of gotten to a crossroads in my life where I really didn't know if I wanted to, you know, do music as in being in a band and dealing with all that and record deals. And, you know, I was just like, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. I've had so much, like, yeah, it was amazing, but I've also had all this bad stuff happen, you know?
Yeah.
And I was struggling. So I thought, well, what else can I do? You know, what else would be like something I could do to support myself, but that I like too, because I loved being in a band and making music and doing all that. But I wanted to find another career. And you know, all this time that had always been there, you know, recording and doing all this stuff. And I thought, well, you know what if I took this seriously? What if I pursued that as my career, you know? And at the time, the timing was actually quite good for it. And so I decided to go back to school, and I went to UCLA, and I took their recording engineering program. And it's a couple year course, but you get kind of like a degree basically out of it. And my thought with that wasn't so much that like, oh, I don't have any idea how to do this, I'm starting from scratch. It's like, I do kind of have an idea how to do this, but I want the experience. And I want to learn from some of the best producers and engineers in the business, which at the time, they had some amazing people there, like Alan Sides and off the top of my head, I can't remember all the teachers, but one of the guys was actually the guy that did the first Boston record. He signed Boston, and there was an amazing story around all that. But so, and the way the program worked back then was that you every weekend you worked in a different studio in LA. Right. And there were only 10 people that got into the program at a time. So there would be like 50 or 100 people that would go into they had this class on electronic theory, basically. And out of like 50 or 100 people, only 10 people would get past this class to get in. Wow. So I thought once I got in there, I was like, oh my God, I'm never going to get, like, this is going to be so hard. There were people in there that were engineers that had already been working for like Alesis and Yamaha, and they were all like technicians. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm not even going to get into this. And just because I guess my common knowledge that I'd had growing up and how much I had taught myself, I was number 9 out of 10 that got through the first try, which I was impressed with myself actually, because I'm like, wow, I had some pretty stiff competition, but at the end of the day, I had experience and they didn't. And so they didn't win. It was the experience of just doing stuff over the years and being around it and all of that. I just knew already, you know? So I was lucky and I got in. And then every weekend you would work in a different studio in LA. So I worked at Capitol Studios. I worked every famous studio. So every weekend I got to work with different gear, a different board, different outboard gear, different tape machines, different mics. And the teachers were these huge engineers and producers. And the other 9 people in my class, maybe with the exception of one, none of them wanted to participate.
Really?
Every time they'd say, so we're going to set this up, and would one of you like to take a stab at the mix? And I'd be like, and no one else, and they'd always be like, anybody besides Amir? Crickets. So I was just like the teacher's pet in every class, because I was just like, let me at it. And then I would do things really unconventionally. I would take compressors and take the bass and just turn everything all the way up and just make a fuzz bass. And they were just like, okay. Like, they were just like, all right, you definitely are different than everybody else, aren't you? Because I would just turn it into like 9 Inch Nails or something. It was like the drums were distorted. I'd, throw all this reverb on this guitar or whatever, and it just was like this cacophony of of noise. But they saw that, that I definitely was different than everyone else. But that led me quickly to the path that before I'd actually graduated, I got the Eels gig.
Nice.
Because my best friend, Matt Thorne, who was the bass player in Rough Cut, I actually helped him build his like garage studio. He wasn't an engineer at the time. He's become a great engineer. He's a great producer and engineer in his own right, has an amazing studio in Burbank. But at the time, he really didn't know any of this stuff. So he got this gig through a friend when he first, because his studio was inexpensive, but had great gear because we, put it all together really well. And it ended up being the Dust Brothers and the Eels. So he's like calling me up like, dude, I have no idea what I'm doing. Can you come over here? And so that's how I got the gig. So I wasn't even out of school yet, and I got that gig. And then the Cold Chamber thing came about because Jay Gordon and I were working together. We had some previous bands and kind of starting this Orgy thing. And he was also kind of finding bands to develop. And we were good friends with Jay Baumgartner, who owns NRG, which is an amazing studio.
Yeah.
And he was looking to bring bands in because he had just finished this room, Studio B, which is the whole like Moroccan room.
Yeah.
And that was way ahead of its time, because back then there was not one studio anywhere that looked like that had that kind of vibe. And it was amazing, because anybody who came in there was just like, oh my God, like this is like being at home and like making a record. Like, what a concept. So, but he, it was too new. So it wasn't booking or anything yet, it was brand new. So JB was like, let's find some bands and start developing bands and getting them signed. And so that's what we started doing. And that's how the Cold Chamber thing came about. And we did a demo for them, and then Roadrunner loved it. And so we ended up doing the record. And that was actually the first record made in that room.
Yeah.
Which, that whole thing is a story in itself that I did a podcast about a week ago called the Meet Podcast, where they talked just about Roadrunner things. And we pretty specifically talked about the making of that album. And wow, that was an ordeal.
Such a heavy band as well, man. It's just like, even back then, I remember listening to Locos like that. Oh man, I was saying to our community as well that video was like, as a teenager, I'm in my late 30s, but that video used to freak me out, man. It was such a cool looking band as well, and very distinct and different, and their vibe and their sound was just so cool, and really interesting. But it was almost tribal as well, the way that they were and the way that they sounded. It's such a cool band.
A lot of that was really created in the studio, honestly. We were lucky because Jay owned the studio, and we spent way more time than we would have really been able to, budget wise, because there was a lot that needed to be done to make them, what that ended up becoming, and they all rose to the occasion. There was a lot there, but it needed to be, brought out, and it did, but it was a process, and that, I think that was, like I said, was around the time of this sort of transition for me, because I was starting to get these gigs, doing this kind of stuff, engineering, producing, mixing, especially with Roadrunner. and also Jay Baumgartner was kind of taking me in as his like partner to do other things like the Spineshank record. And he really helped me a lot. I mean, obviously he gave me, I learned a lot from JB. He was, you know, I had pretty much free reign at the studio, and, you know, so I couldn't be more thankful for him as a friend. And of course, even Jay Gordon, you know, he brought me in as well and found the bands, and, you know, but we did that all as a team. We wore many different hats, but it allowed me to really kind of shine as far as like being the engineer.
Yeah.
You know, both Jays really let me do a lot of stuff, and a lot of times they just weren't around. So I just would put the producer hat on at that point and just make it happen, you know, and it was fun because we all just got along, and, you know, we weren't doing shitty stuff. So, you know, everybody was happy, at least then, you know. But that was the tough time for me because Jay Gordon and I were developing Orgy at the same time as we were doing this other thing. So at a certain point, you know, we had created this Orgy sound, and the interest came really quick. People were on Orgy so quick. We had done something really special. And I mean, we never played a show. We never did a showcase. We didn't even have a full band. No, we didn't even have a full band by the time we were getting record deals.
That's crazy.
It was just, I think it was just the three of us. And then we had to very quickly bring in Paige and Bobby. They were, of course, a part of a lot of it from pretty early on. But I mean, we were already getting interest just from the demos that Jay and I had done with Ryan.
Yeah.
And Josh Abraham, who also became a big producer out of that, because our project was the first project that we did together with him as well. And he was sort of up and coming, and we had been doing projects together on the side as well, because he didn't have a lot of engineering skills, but he had a little studio. So we were also doing a lot of projects back then together. There was a lot of cool synergy and things that was, you know, everybody was kind of helping each other, and a lot of great music came out of that era. But I had to make a decision there, you know, because when the Orgy stuff started blowing up, I actually wasn't going to be in the band originally. I was going to be the producer.
Oh, wow.
I was actually the engineer and producer. And like when we were doing the demos for that, I mean, we did those in Josh's garage. We actually tracked the demos on tape. All the drums on the demos were cut by me in the middle of the night, like editing all these drum bits together. It was a nightmare. But yeah, I wasn't really planning on being in a band anymore at that time. I was like, this engineering producing thing is starting to pan out for me. I think I'm going to just stick with that.
Yeah.
And I'll produce the band. I'll, you know, write and, you know, do whatever it takes to make this get where it's going to be, but I'm not going to be in the band. And they just wouldn't let it go. Josh and Jay Gordon, they were just like, no, dude, you gotta be in the band. And so I thought about it for a while, and that's when I came back with the whole guitar synth approach. And I said, all right, well, you know what? I'm going to be in the band, but guess what? I'm going to play the guitar synthesizer. And they were all like, yeah, cool. They didn't know what the hell I meant by any of that. I don't think.
Nice.
They just thought it sounded cool. And then I walked in with like my Roland, you know, GR700, and then had it all, you know, part of it patched into my Marshall amp and part of it running direct and all this crazy shit. And then I started playing, and they were like, what the fuck? Like that. I mean, even myself, I was like, this sounds like something like I'd never heard this before. Like, this is a new sound. Yeah. So then at that point I was like, okay, as long as you guys let me do what I want to do, I'll be in the band. And that's kind of how all that started, you know, and then ended up being a big part of the sound of what Orgy was from the very beginning, you know, getting that crazy, you know, broken sort of guitar sound that, you know, it was it got me excited about being in a band again.
That's incredible, man. I remember one of my best friends, AJ. He and I, we grew up together, like literally, probably I don't know, 2 minutes down the road. And he showed me this VHS, The Family Values, as well. And you guys, Orgy was on there, and Korn and Limp Bizkit as well, and that incredible tour. But I also remember as well Guitar World magazine, and getting Guitar World magazine, and then seeing you guys with the Parker Fly guitars as well. Yeah. And I can't think of any bands. I don't know if you can off the top of your head who still use the Parker Fly guitars as well. Because
when we started all that, I was just like, I wanted to be as weird as I could be. I wanted weird guitars. And so the 707 at that point, it had its little moment in the 80s, but it was mostly panned, and even like some of the metal bands that used it, it was like a bad word, guitar synthesizers, but the timing just wasn't right then, when I started using it, people were like, oh my God, what is that? And so I was about weird guitars, and the Parker was a weird guitar that sounded great and played great. And it allowed me to put the GR30 pickup that worked with the newer Roland pedal board, the new Roland guitar synth at the time, which was a GR30. And so that became the basis of my sound, was the GR700 with the 707 guitar. And all these had to be hardwired. You couldn't use wireless. So that was hardwired. And then the GR30 was my newer synth that was also hardwired to the Parker initially. Later, I ended up using it with my custom Jacksons and then my Yamahas and so on and so forth. So those were the two foundational synths for the Orgy sound. So that's where I created all this, the sounds basically between those two. And then I had to create this complex switching system, which the then unknown as an amp maker, Dave Friedman, was the guy that I did my rack with, because Rack Systems Limited is Dave's other company that still goes now. And he would create all these live, giant refrigerator racks for all these guitar players. He was like the man. And so I went to him, and that's when our friendship started. And we started going through trying to figure out, like, okay, so I've done all this in the studio now. Now I got to figure out how this is going to work live. I've got to be able to switch between all this. I've got this effects chain that needs to go to a DI, and that goes out to the board, but then this needs to go to this amp or that amp. And yeah, it was tricky, but Dave knocked it out. That rack was solid. I bet if I pulled it out of my storage right now, it'd probably still work, because he's a genius, that guy, with amps and electronics. And of course, I use Friedman amps now, because he makes some amazing shit. Yeah, so it was fun, because I really got to cover all the bases that I'd always wanted to cover. I was the synthesizer player, but I was the guitar player, but then there's this technical part to it all, that I would, I don't think anybody could really copy what I was doing. To this day, I haven't seen anybody do what I was doing, really. So, that also creates a problem when you want to go on tour, because you got to have this giant refrigerator. Which nowadays is totally not practical, and I could probably create most of those sounds with a pedal.
Yeah, completely.
The technology has gone so far that I think that I could probably get away with a lot of that with very little now.
Absolutely. And with the guests, that's so interesting, because the guests that we've had on over the last few weeks, such as Stephen Lipson and Tim Palmer, some incredible producers and songwriters, guitarists, that have written so many amazing bands and produced so many amazing bands. And I know you've worked with Tim as well. And it's really interesting that everyone's like, yep, we use a Kemper now. And it's like kind of all our sounds are just on this one box. And it's just crazy how technology is just
that is one thing I won't skimp on, though. And I
No?
know, people can give me flack all they want, but I just don't find that interesting personally,
Cool.
But when it comes to effects, it's very easy to model all the weird pedals and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the amp, I like a real tube amp through real speakers,
Yeah.
25-watt greenbacks. That's always been my speaker since Rough Cut. Celestion 25-watt greenbacks. I've tried every different speaker, and I don't know why, but that's what I always end up with. Yeah, I love those. Those to me are the tone. Without that, I don't know. I'd be lost.
Incredible. So you love like the air like pumping behind you on stage. Do you actually have so maybe we'll talk about gear maybe in a little while, but no, you're talking about it. So do you have your amps actually on stage with you? Or are you one of these guitar guys that likes to have their guitar amp backstage and just through inner monitors? Or
No, I
how do
like to interact with the amp. That's one thing to me that I don't really think they really can emulate so much. And people can say this is voodoo or whatever, but the guitar and the pickup do interact with the tube amp when you're on stage, because the tubes are, pretty sensitive.
Yeah.
So as you're playing, feedback and all these other things that you do, there is an interaction. When you strum a chord and the way that it sustains, part of that is that going back into the amp. You know what I mean? When you take that away, you lose some of that. It becomes a little dead to me, like sounding. I like that interaction that happens with the real amp and speakers, of course. Live, I mean, I use a Friedman BE50 Deluxe with some Friedman cab with greenbacks, and the only effects device I'm using right now is a Line 6 HX effects. And I'm able to create pretty much every tone that I need in that, and channel switch and do all this other crazy shit. So with just the right guitars, I play a lot of baritone. So half of the set is always baritone, half of it's, more standard tuned. But between, two guitars and that pedal board and that amp, I can pretty much do every tone I need to do.
Amazing. So I know that when we were who were we talking to? One of the engineers. But I think someone mentioned to me a few weeks ago, I think Billy Corgan from the Smashing Pumpkins, he uses an HX effects on stage as well, and that's like his go-to with Line 6. So it's really interesting that you're saying how you kind of blend both worlds together as well. So that's really cool. So with Orgy, tell us about when you were touring with those guys and about touring with bands like Korn and Limp Bizkit. Tell us about that time period, that music. So you guys, obviously you were kind of really experimental, and there's a lot of synths going on. Like you were creating this whole new sound, like you said, with merging guitar and synth together. But it's really interesting how you guys you were part of, dare I say it, the new metal movement. Would you agree with that? Or
No, yeah, we were. I mean, we were purposely we wanted to be a part of that. It was kind of an interesting thing about, especially with Orgy's sound and how that came about, because we really did try to not be like anybody else when it came to everything, whether it was the drums, the bass, the guitars, the vocals, everything. A lot of times in some of the songs, the bass was almost like the guitar part. And then the guitar would do these like high, synth parts, or it would reverse, where the guitar is kind of doing, like, I would be playing almost the bass synth, and doing this, and then the bass is playing this like high kind of part, almost like a guitar part, and the drums were purposely electronic. Everything was purposely very cold, broken, and distorted. That was, we definitely knew that we wanted that. We definitely knew what we didn't want to sound like. But at the same time, we tuned down, which was very much a big part of the Korn influence that we had, was tuning down, using 5-string bass, using a 7-string guitar that Ryan had. And doing all of that was a big part of that new metal kind of vibe. But we also, I personally really fought for us to really be different, in every different way that we could be. But at the same time, you know, we wanted to be melodic. We wanted to have hooks. So, I mean, there was a lot of thought. Some of it we just stumbled into just because of how the band is, how all the guys in the band are, and what everybody brought to the table, and how much, you know, how connected we were in the vision. Not only the way we looked, but the way that we sounded, and also the way that we presented ourselves live, which in the beginning was a fucking disaster.
Really?
It didn't work. No. When we went out on Family Values, we literally fell on our faces the first couple of weeks because what we were trying to do, no one understood. And it really wasn't that difficult. Oh, sorry about that. It really wasn't difficult. But we needed a sound check, and we needed, you know, guys to just actually pay attention. It wasn't a 3-piece rock and roll band. You know, we had electronic drums that needed to be in monitors. We had guitar synths and things that needed to be in monitors. And we were having a lot of problems with the drums triggering in the beginning because we were using a V drum set. No one had ever used that, like on a major tour at the time. It was new, and they didn't work very well. And they would trigger when they weren't supposed to trigger, and they wouldn't trigger when they were supposed to trigger. And it was a nightmare. And the first couple of weeks, we thought we were going to just fail 100% and be kicked off the tour and sent home because we just could not get it together. And luckily, our brothers in Korn, who had signed us, basically, we went to them and said, look, we can't make this work unless we get, you know, we just need like 10 minutes every night just to make sure everything is plugged in. And, you know, this isn't a live band. This is a band that's doing something that no one's ever done before in this way. We don't have tracks behind us or tape or whatever. Like, we have to make all this work with the gear that we have and the way that we're doing it. And if we can't hear it, you know, we can't do this. So they went to their crew and everybody and just said, look, we need to give these guys a chance to make this right. And after, what happened was, we did a show actually before this. In that first couple of weeks, we ended up playing this huge show in New York. It was our own show. And it was a very important show for us because this was where everyone was coming. MTV, the press, like everything. And this was our chance to show everybody, like, look, guys, we can actually do this. You just have to help us by giving us, you know, 10 minutes to line check or whatever, just so we can make sure everything's working, and, you know, a sound man that actually gives a shit. And we did this show, and we devastated. Like, we annihilated that place. And after that, Korn was like, okay, we get it. And they went back, and from that point on, we started crushing. And then there was hope. There was a light at the end of the tunnel. But I mean, we really were defeated at first. I didn't think we were going to make it, honestly, on the tour. It was that bad. We just really had no idea that the live element was going to create so many gremlins for us. But, you know, we were using a lot of stuff that really wasn't, no one was really doing what we were doing. And we didn't really know what we were doing, honestly. You know, I mean, when you try new things, this is the shit that happens, you know, you're going to fall on your face, but you got to figure it out. And then you get in there and you make it happen. And by the time we started headlining our own shows, we had such a great system. It was so good at that point, the way we were doing it. Like, we actually really sounded good. But it took a while to figure it out, because what we created in the studio and then actually being able to do it live turned out to be quite a challenge.
That's incredible. So, and with when you moved on to the next album with Orgy that you did as well, how did you approach like new synth sounds and new guitar sounds? Did you for the next session, did you kind of want to try again, push the envelope and try new sounds and like new ideas?
No, actually, I felt like after the first record that, you know, I always use the AC/DC analogy, but it's like AC/DC had such a great sound from the very beginning. You're never going to change that, right? It's like, and that's why, you know, for many years, I mean, they just do the same thing, every time, right? Now, I wasn't saying like, oh, I want to make the same record every time, but I felt like we established a sound. But I did think there was room for improvement, and I do believe that we did improve on the sound that we created on the first record with the second record. I think it sonically sounds better. Yes, there were new synths introduced into my rack. I had 2 more things that were wired in, so it became even more complex, but I did need more sounds. But the system was in place, so everything's still routed the same way. It was the same controllers. But I just needed a little more of a palette, a little more to paint with, you know? So, but everything was we kind of kept everything the same. It just, we wanted to make it better, make it sound better. And by that point, I think we were fully digital. That album, I think, was completely recorded in Logic.
Wow.
Yep. But it was mixed. Let me think about this. Well, there were actually a lot of people involved in the mix, so I don't really remember exactly how it was mixed, but I know the first record we recorded most of the instruments on tape, but we had an 8-track, what was it called? I don't remember what Pro Tools was called, but it was an 888. Do you remember those?
No.
It was an interface that was about this big, 19-inch, 2-space rack. It was probably one of the first, IOs. It was called an 888, and I think it was, maybe it was DigiDesign, I guess, was the company that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So we had 8 tracks that we recorded on that, and then 24 tracks. I guess maybe some stuff was actually 48. So the first album was a bit of a hybrid, and then all of that, when it was mixed, everything was bounced to Sony 48 tracks. And the majority of the first album was mixed by Dave Ogilvy from Skinny Puppy fame and all of that. He also worked on the second record as well. Jay Baumgartner did some. I know we did some together. And I think David Kahn did a song or 2 on the second record. He was an interesting guy, producer. He was also our head of A&R at the time. But again, when I go back through all this, like you're talking about Tim Palmer, who was on here recently, Tim was also very gracious. I remember a very specific thing I learned from him was the dynamic mixing. He was the first one who showed me how he would do that in Pro Tools, how, like he would, make the choruses louder and the verses a little softer and, all that kind of stuff. And although, of course, we did that back in the day when, everything was automation, flying faders or whatever, a lot of the mixing, was done by hand, and the mutes and everything, you did it by hand. But I was like, oh yeah, I guess that makes sense. Do that, on the master fader, just kind of, I still do that to this day. I think, for me, I that's a key part of my mixing strategy, is that I always, almost 90% of the time dynamically mix songs so that, they kind of start out here and here, and they kind of, build and build. But it depends on the song, because some songs aren't like that. And then, it's more of a roller coaster ride, or maybe it's more linear, so it depends on the song. But I learned that from Tim. I'm sure many other things that he taught me as well during the process of mixing our first Julian-K record. And you should have Mark Needham on here, because he's amazing. That guy is like, I learned a lot of stuff from him. He mixed our second Julien-K record, and again, he was also very gracious. I was able to attend some of those sessions, and he took my questions. I'm like, okay, the vocals sound amazing. What the hell are you doing? Will you please show me? And there's some elements of what I learned from that I still use to this day on pretty much every vocal that I mix. He just, when we got the record back, I was just like, wow, like the vocal sounds so good. And I learned right then, I'm like, okay, I really got to step my game up on that, the vocal stuff. I always felt like, oh, I'm pretty good at guitars and bass, and was never that great at drums, never that great at vocals. You know, of course, fine at keyboards and all that kind of stuff. So over the years, I've really learned to step it up in the drums and in the vocals to kind of make up for what I felt was lacking in my mixes and productions in the past.
It's amazing though. It's like, because I think we've talked to other engineers about this over the past few weeks as well, that the fact that you just constantly learn, because there's like, as you said, you know, kind of like you started off in the 80s, walking into a studio, cutting tape, like you've mentioned, as well, like learning all that, the outboard stuff, and obviously then moving into the digital domain. But it's just incredible that there's just like all this new technology that comes out all the time. Yeah. So we're just forever learning and encouraging one another as well, which is so, so crucial.
To keep pushing.
Yeah, completely. And it's amazing, but it's great the fact that, you know, an engineer in their 70s will turn around, or in their 80s, and literally turn around and go, how does this work? Someone tell me how this works. You know, they want to learn constantly, which is great. It's
totally. I stumble on things all over the place, you know, whether it be just some random YouTube tutorial thing to, you know, you meet somebody or talk to somebody and they're like, hey, have you tried this plugin or whatever? And it's like, no, I haven't. Let me try that out. Let's see what that does. Oh, that's cool. You know? Yeah.
Amazing, man. Tell us, so
someone's studio, like when I go track, you know, I typically track drums in a lot of different studios in town. So, you know, a lot of times I'll go places and, oh, you're doing that. Oh, that's kind of cool. I've never thought of doing that. Okay. You know, it's just constantly learning, like you said.
Absolutely, man. It's so important, and it's just fun as well. It's fun to learn and fun to kind of like find new ideas, as well. So tell us about so maybe we'll have a chat about Julian-K in a minute, but tell us about some of the film projects that you worked on as well. So you talked, you said you've got a great story about Freaky Friday as well. So yeah, tell us the story behind that that film and that song. I understand that you taught a couple of famous people how to play guitar. Am I right in saying that? Yeah, tell us.
It was that I was very fortunate to get this opportunity, and again, it was one of those things that I was kind of hesitant about at first, but I knew better, and I thought, okay, I got to jump in and just see where this takes me. Initially, it was brought to me by a good friend in the music industry, that they needed a guitar coach for a young Lindsay Lohan, which of course at the time, you know, she was a child star that had been in some famous Disney movies, but really wasn't known outside of that, you know, like she is now.
Yeah.
And initially, I think Kelly Osbourne was supposed to play her role, but then something happened. I think her mom was sick or something, and so she actually jumped out of the movie. And so what happened was all the other characters that were already in place got moved up a spot. So Lindsay, although she was just supposed to be like a guitar player or something in the band, she got moved up to being the main girl, or the main lead guitar player, sorry.
Yeah.
So I was hired to basically just make her look like she could play guitar or whatever. So I came in, started working with her, and it went really well. And she actually wanted to learn how to play guitar. So it wasn't just that she wanted to fake it. She wasn't trying to take a shortcut. She was like, I really want to learn something, you know, this is cool. This is fun. And, you know, and so she did actually learn how to play guitar. And then of course I was also teaching her like the moves, and they basically relied on me for everything that you see when it comes to the music parts of the movie. And it became more and more as they started seeing the progress that first started with Lindsay, not only, you know, like the way she stands, the guitar that she's using, how it's positioned, the way the guitar looks, you know, everything. They were relying on me, and I was just, you know, delivering and over delivering every time. So eventually it became like, well, look, you know, you're doing such a great job with her. We want you to start overseeing the band, and we want you to choreograph the band, and we want you to be the continuity when we do the shots for the band. We want you to come in and actually watch what's happening with the director. And the director's like, look, I want you literally to kind of direct this scene. Like, if something doesn't look right, you tell us to cut. And like, I was just like, wow, this is nuts. I mean, this is a major motion picture production. And the director and the producer and like everybody we just got along so well, and they were so nice to me and so welcoming. And they just kept throwing things to me, you know, and so I don't remember the order of how it all happened, but I remember that the end of the movie was shot first, which is fairly typical in Hollywood. And so when that end scene was shot, that was the first day that Jamie Lee Curtis had showed up on set. And she saw the scene and was so blown away by it that she wanted to know how that got done, because she couldn't believe how believable it was and how good it all looked. Amazing. And they were all like, that guy. And so she came over to me and she's like, you're going to be working with me every day on this thing until I get my part right for my scenes. And she went to the director and she went to the producer and basically hired me to work with, that I needed to be on set every single day of this picture.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, thank you. So I ended up working with Jamie Lee, as well as the band. And in this process, it turned out that this is where it goes back to the Dust Brothers. Mike Simpson ended up being the guy that was producing the music for the band, Pink Slip, in the movie. So we ended up working together again. And he said, look, why don't you just do all the guitar parts? Because you're teaching them what to play anyway. Why not, you know, if you do it, you're going to know it better than anyone. Yeah. So I ended up going to the studio and recording all the guitar parts, the solos, and all this stuff so that I could teach them. So that was great for me as well. And then in this process, the director, everybody, music supervisor came to me and said, look, we want you to do a song for the movie too. Like, would you produce a song? And they had already had a cover song from a band. I don't remember who they were, but they had this song. It was called Me Versus, and they were like, we need you to, you know, do a new version of this, and we need to find a band to do it. And coincidentally, at the time, I had met this all-girl band that was actually from Long Beach, where I live now. I had been kind of working with this band, and so I went to them and I said, you're never going to believe this, but they've just kind of handed me this song, and they need, I mean, honestly, an all-girl band would be perfect for this. Would you guys be up for it? You know, we just need to go in the studio and record it, cover it, you know, we'll make our own version of it. And it turned out to be the single, which they made a video for in the movie. So, and then I ended up being in the movie. The director insisted that I have a part in the movie as well. So I have a couple little lines and stuff in the movie. So it just became something way bigger than I ever expected. And like I said in the beginning, when they were like, oh, you know, would you come in and be a guitar guru or whatever? And I was like, oh God, really? Like, I don't know if I want to do that. But then at the end of the day, I'm like, okay, you know what? You got to just do this and see where this takes you, because who knows? And it ended up being this huge thing for me, you know? And of course the record went gold. And like I said, the song that I did was one of the singles. It was, you know, I made a video. It was all over Disney radio and TV and all that. So it was a really funny story, like this journey that got me there, and how many things just kind of fell into place. You know, the fact that I had just met this all-girl band called the Halo Friendlies. Sorry, I failed to mention their name. Yeah. This girl, Ginger, who ended up playing bass with the Smashing Pumpkins.
Wow.
Yeah. So, yeah, that was a really amazing opportunity that, again, I'm very grateful for. It was such an amazing learning experience being on set pretty much every day for a major motion picture, and everybody just welcomed me with open arms. I learned how to make a movie, basically. The director would you know, bring me in, and a lot of times he would tell me, he's like, "Oh, this is why we're setting it up like this and doing this and lighting it like this." And I'm just like, I mean, people would kill for this kind of an education.
But has that helped as well? Maybe shooting videos for Julian-K as well on the
Yes.
projects that you've worked on. Has that been the foundation for a lot of your knowledge when you're shooting music videos for
Oh,
projects?
it's definitely a part of it, but a lot of it was just trial and error, because in Orgy, a lot of the videos, well, not a lot, all of the videos started with us.
Yeah.
And then we would work with outside people to actually, you know, make it happen. But, you know, we kind of learned that, you know, we needed to be a part of it if we really wanted it to come out the way that we wanted. And so a lot of the time, you know, we had to step in, and there were people that needed to be fired and people that needed to be hired. And because we kind of knew what we didn't want. We didn't know maybe exactly what we did want, but we knew what it was when we saw it.
Yeah.
And I think that was the beginning of it, you know, because we were so involved with all of that. We learned a lot there. Yes, obviously working on Freaky Friday, and then, you know, we just kind of dove in. I mean, our first Julian-K video was very ambitious and controversial. But yeah, I mean, we just finished a video. We did a collaboration recently. We've created this new thing called the alternative universe, or alternate universe, whatever you want to say. Where we're collaborating with other artists in a way where it's like we're creating a band together that we create, and then we do a song. They take our song, kind of reinterpret it, but then we kind of become a band for a short time. And we've made a video, and we've made merchandise, and
nice.
The video actually comes out on Monday for Your Lies Are Like Fire, with our collaboration with the Annex. And Brandon's been amazing. He's extremely talented. We were very fortunate that all worked out, and I can't wait for everybody to see that. And that was a video. It was a very collaborative effort between Brandon and some people that he brought in to film, and Ryan and myself. And it was very easy. Everybody got along great. Everybody's ideas gelled, and speak for itself.
Absolutely amazing. And the vibe as well. I've watched some of the Annex. I noticed the Annex joined the community as well, so I checked out a couple of the videos. I'm loving the vibe, man. It's like the sound as well. I can hear like this industrial thing going on. It's like Nine Inch Nails vibe going on there as well. And just the whole visual behind it. So with before we start talking about Julian-K and maybe like Dead by Sunrise and other projects that you've done as well, with the visual aspect as well. So obviously you mentioned that obviously recording all these incredible videos. With Orgy, for example, it's like I'm guessing that back then the budgets were much bigger as well compared to, you know, been on a shoestring now, I'm guessing. You know. So it's crazy. But no, tell us about the MTV days as well, and maybe what was expected for a video back then, and what it looked like.
Yeah, you definitely had to be spending six figures. 3 figures now. 6 figures back then to do anything, you know, of any real quality. It was definitely tricky. I mean, we had a lot of problems with all the videos that we did, getting them to where we, you know, really saw them being. But, you know, we did work with some really talented people, but in the end, most of the videos needed to be kind of steered somewhat by us to get them across the finish line, I guess you would say.
Sure.
And it was very tricky, but I guess by the time we did the second record, we were not afraid to spend a lot of money. I mean, I think the Fiction video was easily somewhere between $500,000 and $750,000.
Wow.
I mean, we built a giant movie set like you would for Star Wars. I mean, we literally had a giant, you know, warehouse, like one of these, I forget what you call it, but, you know, where they build, you know, giant sets within there. I mean, everything was real. It was all built. And they actually shot models, like for some of there were miniatures that were created just like Star Wars stuff, you know, where they would shoot across, you know, like the side of a spaceship or whatever. I mean, it was insane. Everything was created from scratch. The outfits, just everything, you know, and it was crazy time then. But you kind of had to step it up because, you know, we had to be on TRL. We had to, you know, we had to have this certain level in the visual department because, you know, we had started here, but, you know, we had to keep that going. And at that time, I mean, a lot of these pop stars were spending, you know, over $1 million on videos.
Yeah, sure.
And but it was worth it back then because there was only one place to see it really, which was MTV. And if you got on there and you got on TRL, you know, you were done. We were really lucky that MTV chose us to be one of those bands because that, I mean, MTV really knocked it out of the park for us.
Yeah.
So that was, you know, I'm super grateful for that.
Amazing, man. Tell us about the birth of Julian-K then. So Orgy finished, I'm guessing, and then Julian-K then took over. How did it happen?
Yeah, Orgy was just so dysfunctional at that point that we, you know, Ryan and I were writing a lot of material and it just wasn't going anywhere. So we had actually started it as like a side project because we were bored. And, you know, Orgy was just so dysfunctional that we couldn't do anything, couldn't finish anything. We couldn't tour. The band was just falling apart. And, you know, out of the ashes of Orgy, Dead by Sunrise also started, the pun intended with the title. But yeah, I mean, so Julian-K and Dead by Sunrise basically started almost simultaneously. Chester was a very good friend from very early on. We had met while I think we were working on our second record and they were finishing their first record in NRG, and we became friends while we were in the studio recording, and they were label mates and they were amazing. I mean, we all knew they were going to be huge, you know, before the record ever even came out. And so when we went out on our own tour headlining, it was proposed that they go with us. And Disturbed as well.
Wow.
I have a poster from one of our shows. It's Orgy, Disturbed, and Linkin Park.
Oh, that's so amazing.
It's insane.
That's crazy.
And, yep. So they went out on tour with us, and you know, we just all became such good friends, especially Chester. I mean, Chester was such an amazing person, such an amazing friend. As well as all the guys in Linkin Park. I mean, they've been so good to us as Julien-K and as Dead by Sunrise. Still, you know, it's like there's a long line there that we've been connected. And so during that time, you know, Chester, when he heard what Ryan and I were doing Julien-K, Chester was like, I want to be the singer. Let me be the singer. He wanted to be the singer of Julien-K.
No way.
And we were like, Chester, like, you know, this isn't really you. You know what I mean? Like you have a thing that's so special and so like beyond what we're doing with Julien-K. Like we're super honored that like and flattered that you want to be a part of this, but it was very difficult to tell him no, basically, you know, because Ryan's like, well, I kind of want to be the singer, you know, like I want to be the front man and I want to try this thing. And Chester's like, okay, I get it. You know, like it was like, how do you turn that down? You know what I mean?
Yeah, completely.
But at the same time, you know, he had some ideas and Ryan and I started thinking like, you know, Chester, why don't we just kind of develop something around your ideas? Because you've got some great ideas, you know? And so that's how Dead by Sunrise started. So simultaneously, you know, we created Julien-K and then we created Dead by Sunrise, although Dead by Sunrise really was Julien-K because it was all the same guys.
Yeah.
But the sound was purposely different. It was a lot more raw, a lot more, you know, not as electronic. It was much more punk rock, but it still had some of the industrial kind of kick-assness. but some good old, you know, rock and roll kind of kick-assness as well, you know, but good songs. And so we started developing that at the same time, and very quickly discovered that there was something really amazing there. And so we really just kind of had this two-pronged attack at that point. And unfortunately, you know, Orgy just kind of fell to the wayside because we just couldn't get it together, you know, with Jay to make that happen. We wanted to, but he decided at some point, you know, many years into that, that he was just going to go in on his own, which of course we weren't happy about. But, you know, I mean, it's not like we didn't have tons of stuff to do.
Absolutely. How did you help Chester then develop his songs? How did that come about? And tell us about the studio sessions and what, you know, what rig you had at the time as well, and what instruments we used. Tell us the story behind that album.
Yeah, I mean, you know, a lot of the stuff we probably still have a lot of the same. You know, our recording rig is pretty simple. I mean, it's always been Pro Tools and just some good mic pre's and a few good microphones, and then of course tons of great outboard synths and drum machines and all that kind of stuff. But you know, nothing crazy. I purposely kind of set us up in a way, you know, I don't want to maintain vintage gear and all that. It's not that important to me. What's important is just good sound. You know, we have like Neve clones, we have APIs, we have some universal audio stuff. We do have good microphones, but you know, it's U47 clone for the vocals, Pro Tools with all the, you know, usual stuff. But again, nothing overly crazy. And you know, we have a small studio where we basically developed Julian-K and Dead by Sunrise, and we took Chester would come in with like his really raw ideas with an acoustic guitar. Sometimes he had some vocal ideas, sometimes he had a melody, sometimes he didn't have anything more than just some simple riff or something.
Yeah.
And just come in and lay down. And actually at the time, I think Chester was living with us. We did that kind of on purpose too, because then it made it easy for us to, you know, when he wasn't off with Linkin Park, he would be home and we would just work whenever we felt like working. Yeah. And he would also help us with Julian-K too. You know, especially on the first album, he was around for that. And so we would take these really raw ideas, put them down. We'd pick a tempo, you know, we'd work the tempo, get just a click track going basically, but you know, find a good feeling tempo to start with the raw idea. Yeah. And then lay it down, and then he'd be like, okay, cool, I'm out of here. And then we would work furiously, you know, mainly Fu and I, and Ryan would come in and do stuff too. But we, you know, build up all the programming and basically start to build up this idea. And then I remember when we did the first song, it was Let Down. He came back in like a couple days later, and I mean, we had what you hear now, it's not much different from what we had done in those first couple days. He came in and he was just, yeah, he was like so blown away. He was like running around the house. He's like, oh my God, we can do this. Like, this is going to be so amazing. Like, let's do more. Yeah. And so we did a bunch more. And then, you know, that's kind of how it started. And he was the one who decided, you know, he didn't want it to be called Chester Bennington or whatever. No, he wanted it to be a band. You know, he always had our back, even though a lot of other people didn't. Not Linkin Park, by the way, because Linkin Park supported him and our project together like you would not believe. I mean, they took us out on tour, you know, to promote what we were doing. So there were issues with the label and stuff that they didn't really like what we were doing. It was not good, honestly. No. And that part of it, the politics with the label and all of that really did not go well. And that's part of the reason why the record was not as successful as it should have been.
Sure.
Although we did really well in Europe because they got it and they did everything that they, you know, usually do but here they just really, I don't know what the deal was, but it just did not They just did not want to see that happen, it seemed like, honestly. And of course, Julian-K got taken out on Project Revolution, which was a massive opportunity for us when our record wasn't even out at the time. That's a whole other story. We actually kind of got screwed too.
Really?
Yeah, so it was like we created these two amazing things, and then all the politics got in the way.
Yeah.
And we didn't get to launch either one like the way that we had envisioned. And it was unfortunate. But we've had to rebuild things over the years, and all of that has worked out very well. For Julian-K, unfortunately, for Dead by Sunrise, that will never be able to be worked out, which is very unfortunate. The whole Chester thing, it's a sad story, because God, the guy was the sweetest guy, best friend you could ever have.
Yeah.
So talented. And for that to happen, it's such a tragedy,
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, for us over in the UK as well, I remember Linkin Park, One Step Closer came on, for the first time, funny enough, on MTV as well. Like, I can't remember when it was, like 2000, something like that. But just seeing that video for the first time, and Mike doing his rapping and Chester's voice as well. It's just that voice, Chester's voice is just undeniable. I can't think of any other singer that sounds like Chester.
Yeah. And there won't be. And there won't be.
No.
Trust me, I've recorded the guy. He had Matt. We used to call him Golden Throat.
Yeah.
We used to call him Old Golden Throat, because he had this like in his vocal cords, like there's certain singers that have these like little, I don't know what you call them, almost like reeds, but when he would sing, there would be like this tone, like another tone, like you'd hear the main tone, but then there was this like underlying undertone kind of thing, or overtone, I guess. I don't know what you call it, but so when he would sing, there'd be like two notes.
Yeah.
It's like the craziest, and you wouldn't really hear it. Like the mic doesn't really pick it up. Like it's there subliminally. But when you're in a room with him, and I always track vocals in the actual room. I've never liked putting singers in a box. I've never done that. I don't like that. Occasionally it's had to be, some singers like it that way. Like Des from Coal Chamber, he wanted to be in a box. He didn't want anybody around him. But most of the time, I don't do it that way. I've always been in the same, like in the control room. We have a perfect sized little room. It's not very big, so it works perfectly for vocals. You don't have to do any crazy treatment. We would literally I would be sitting right next to him. And a lot of times when people are doing vocals, I don't even put the headphones on or anything. I'm just listening to what they're doing in the room. And I was always like, wow, that's so weird. Like I hear these other sounds coming out, and it's like, no wonder, like you've got a gift. Like that's just, you can't make that. You can't practice that. You can't train for that. It's a gift. And he had it, and it's like, God, it was so cool. I get like goosebumps thinking about it, because when he would do it, I'd just be like, what is that? There's like a demon in there.
Completely.
And, at the end of the day, there really was a demon. And that's the sad part of it all, is that he really did have demons.
Yeah.
And that's why, I firmly believe why he was so great at what he was able to do, because people could, people aren't stupid, and they can sense things even if they don't know what it is. But the way that he sold what he was singing, what he was saying and what he was singing, it was real. It was very real to him. And that's why it worked so well. Why he had this gift that he could really translate that in the way that, especially his screams. His screams are just blood curdling. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like,
absolutely.
My God, you knew. I mean, and that's the demon. That's, now I realize it. I'm like, there really was a demon in him. That this thing that he couldn't in the end control, that all this stuff that he had inside him, he was able to purge it, but in the end it it took him from us, I think, you know.
Absolutely, man. It's so sad, and it just. But I just think back though, it's like to how many people that over the years that he would have actually helped with his lyrics as well, and how many people he would have actually helped get through their hard times. And you know,
he knew all that too, but you know, in the end, I guess all of it just became too overwhelming for him somehow.
Yeah.
And he couldn't control it anymore. And it's really sad because you know, none of us really saw it. You know, there were dark sides that I saw to him on occasions. You know, there were times where I got to see that, what we used to call the dark passenger.
Yeah.
He had a dark passenger, but it was very rare that you would get a glimpse at it, because most of the time he was the life of the party. He was your best friend.
Yeah.
But I never realized how bad it was, you know, and that's always the part it sucks, because you just think, God, I wish I could have known that, you know. I don't know if I could have helped or not, but I wish I had the opportunity, you know. That's the only thing that it just sucks. But I'm so grateful that I had him in my life for so many years, and I cherish all those moments. And you know, we think about him, talk about him. I know he's here with us all the time. We feel him. You know, I know he would be very proud of Brian and myself and the things that we've accomplished on our own. I mean, he told me many times, there were times where he would take me aside and he's like, God, I'm so jealous. You know, you guys get to do everything the way you want to do it. And I'm like, yeah, but look at you. I mean, look where you are, dude. It's like, it's amazing. Like, you're one of the best singers in the world and one of the best bands ever. And, you know, it's like, it's crazy, you know, when you look at things, but yet there was something about what we were doing, you know, being this little indie band that he really admired and wanted to be, you know, he wanted to be a part of it too, you know. And it's like, it's so endearing and so cute, you know. He was so sweet and fun. Like, I mean, you could never not have a great time when you were with Chester.
Oh, but absolutely. But you know what? That first song though on Dead by Sunrise, that song, man, it's just so powerful. The first song on the album. I love Fire. Yeah. I love your, is it? Yeah, I think it's you playing that delayed guitar on there as well. And Chester's lyrics on there, man, as well. It's just like, it's just wonderful. That's the only way I can describe it, as cheesy as that may sound. But it's just the fact, it's very uplifting. So the fact that, you know, he could just, the fact that he could switch from the scream to that uplifting thing.
That's kind of what we really wanted to showcase, that there was more to him, you know, that not that, you know, because Linkin Park's amazing and obviously he gets to do, but
yeah, completely.
We did one side of Chester really, and the root of all the songs, although we created everything together from the ground up, but the roots all came from him initially. And that's what, you know, we wanted to keep true to that, because that was what was going to make it all very different, and also really honor what he wanted, you know, his vision. But at the same time, he gave us free reign to do whatever we wanted. And it was really fun because, you know, you look at a song like Fire, and, you know, the arrangement, a lot of the songs on there, the arrangements are not very conventional. You know, they're really kind of journey songs that take you on this sort of journey. And luckily in the beginning, when we created, you know, the bulk of the record, before the label really was even involved, they didn't really have a whole lot of say in all of that, you know. So I feel fortunate that we were able to kind of pull that off to some degree, because I'm sure they would have really wanted it to go a very different direction, honestly.
Yeah.
And Chester really stuck up for us being his band and for us doing what we wanted to do and how we wanted to do it. He fought for that, and I will be eternally grateful to him for that, because, you know, he could have kicked us to the curb.
Yeah, completely.
You know, from the pressure and everything else, but he was like, fuck no, that's not happening. And we're not calling it Chester Bennington. It's going to be, we ran around with a lot of different names for a while, but it's going to be a band name. I want this to be a band. He was very specific about that. And that was really cool because a lot of guys would be like, no. And I mean, honestly, marketing wise, it's not the smartest decision. It probably would have been easier to market it as a Chester Bennington record, than this band, but he did not want to go that route. So it just kind of gives you a little insight to what an amazing person he was. I'm sure most people have heard all the stories, but it's like, I wish he was still here. It just breaks my heart.
Absolutely, man. But what I love though as well is like with when you guys were touring with Linkin Park as well, and I understand, if I'm right in saying this, that it would be in the middle of the set that Dead by Sunrise would actually come. Was it at the beginning, or was it at the beginning of the set?
It was the encore. No, and this was Mike Shinoda's idea. He said, what we want to do is we want to take you guys out on the road with us, but we want to surprise everybody with the band and have you guys come out on the encore, and people will be like, what the fuck is going on here? And you guys play a couple songs, and then we'll do the Linkin Park encore and explain to everybody that this is Chester's new side project. And I mean, that was a ballsy move on his part and on the band's part for allowing us to do that. We were all like, are you kidding? Like, wow. Okay. Thank you. Like, that's how supportive they were of the project and of Chester doing this. And we were all friends, like I said, we all, we were there in the beginning, and, we were there then, it's like everybody, we've stayed friends all these years. And we were fortunate that at the memorial that they did at the Hollywood Bowl, that they honored us by having Ryan and I and Jonathan Davis do One Step Closer, which, that was a big deal for us. I mean, it was like, wow, what an honor. And with our old friend Jonathan as well. I mean, boy, that guy has done a lot for us as well. And it was just like, wow, what a crazy life, what a crazy circle to now be on stage here without Chester, but with Linkin Park and Jonathan. And here we are playing One Step Closer. And it's just like, I mean, it chokes me up right now thinking about it, and it's just like, wow.
It's crazy. Some things I think maybe you just, I mean, I lost a friend that passed away, that took his own life years ago. And I sometimes think about kind of, famous people like Chester that have been through that, and Chris Cornell as well. And you there think, kind of how could I have helped my friend at that moment in time? But, I just love the fact that it's just that, Chester's legacy and what he's done, it's just so stunning, the work that he's given to the world as well. And the albums are so incredible. And the fact that, someone like Jonathan Davis came on stage and joined you, man, that's beautiful. That is absolutely, it's so sad. It gives me so chills. Beautiful at the same time.
It gives me chills, the whole thing,
completely. That's incredible.
We were completely honored that they asked us. I have to make a pit stop, if that's possible. Maybe you can maybe you can get some questions, and we can answer maybe some questions real quick. And also, I don't know if we want to get into any more deeper technical stuff on this,
let's go for it,
or if it's more storytelling. So I will be right back.
Cool, man. No worries. Fantastic. What I will say, just why Amir is making his pit stop, is I just want to say huge welcome to everyone that's joined today. So a bit about Produce, Mix, Fix and Conquer and what we've been doing over the past few weeks. So since November, the community actually started off with just 3 of us, and it's now grown to over 2,300 engineers. So if you do want to join, you don't have to be an engineer. You could just maybe be a producer, or you could be a songwriter, whatever your thing is, a mixer. If you just want to learn, if you're right at the beginning, or if you're a seasoned pro, join us, which is facebook.com facebook.com/groups/produce, mix, fix, and conquer. And we've had some wonderful guests on over the past few weeks. We've been absolutely honored and blessed, obviously, to have Amir with us today. So we've had Bob Katz that's joined us. We've also had Tim Palmer. We've had some incredible Bob Olsen as well. We cover every genre of music that you can think of, and it's just been a wonderful experience so far. There's a YouTube channel if you want to join our YouTube channel. Facebook's not your thing, which is youtube.com/produce, mix, fix, and conquer. So on there, what we do, so the video, so if you've got some friends that have missed out watching Amir live today, this video will actually be live on our channel, so you'll be able to watch on youtube.com/produce, mix, fix, and conquer. And then what we'll do is we'll be editing this video and then re-uploading as well. So more than welcome to join the community. I know Amir's been with us for a few weeks now, I think. Now you've won PMFC. And how have you, just really quickly before we carry on, how have you found the community? Have you been enjoying it with what's been happening on there as well, with all the questions and interactions from all the engineers?
Yeah, no, I've seen some fun stuff. I loved your question about, like, you know, what's your studio name and how you came about that and all that. That was cool. It was interesting to see how other people came up with the names of their studios and stuff like that. I call mine Syntheside.
No way.
Which is it's a goofy song by this LA band called SSQ.
Yeah.
They were in the 80s, and the lead singer became Stacy Q, who had a hit with Two of Hearts. I don't know if you know that over there, but Two of Hearts was a big single over here back in the 80s. So this was her sort of band before that, and on that album there's a song called Syntheside, and I thought that's kind of a stupidly funny name, and it's actually the name of my publishing company too.
Oh wow, no way.
Yeah, for like my songwriting stuff, like, yeah.
Oh, incredible, man. So tell us a bit more about, so where maybe we could have a chat about guitars and some questions and some gear stuff as well. But tell us about Julian-K. So after Dead by Sunrise, where did Julian-K go from there, and where are you at now with the band currently?
Well, we had some pretty bad false starts, I guess you would say, with the first and second record. You know, we were trying different things, and it just was kind of all a disaster. Not the records themselves, but the ways that we were connecting with people and putting them out. And although the first record we put out through Metropolis, and that wasn't a disaster by any means, but we had initially thought we'd be signed to a major label and had some interest, but we went a different route, and that ended up being a big fiasco. And the second record, we ended up working with a guy in Europe, and that ended up being a fiasco as well. And after the second record, we kind of thought, like, I'm not sure if we want to do this anymore. Like, it was just not going well. And then, of course, Dead by Sunrise didn't really go expected her. So we started, you know, Ryan really spearheaded. You know, Ryan definitely handles a lot more of the business ideas and directions, and then Fu and I kind of balance it out, because we're like the no guys, you know, like we hate everything basically.
Right.
So, you know, you get a good balance, because we're the pessimists, you know, completely like, oh, fuck that, that's never gonna work. And then Ryan's like, oh my God, I got this idea, it's amazing. Like, I got this other idea and it's amazing. And, you know, so you got the complete opposite. So when you meet in the middle, you know, magic happens. So he brought the crowdfunding thing to us, and we started doing that. And at first we weren't sure that we were going to do it. And then we figured it was kind of a make or break. Like, if we can make this work, then we should probably continue as a band. And if we can't, then yeah, let's just call it a day and move on. And it worked so well that it relaunched our career basically as a band. And so we were doing that. Now we're doing a Patreon. If any of you are out there don't know about our Patreon, you know, please check it out. We do live streams from our studio every weekend. There's so much content and things that you can't get anywhere else that we do every week. And that's been our lifesaver, especially through the pandemic. Again, Ryan spearheaded that and started that right at the beginning of the pandemic, and it saved our asses, our fans. Amazing. You know, we can't say enough great things about our fans. They're our business partners now. You know, we listen to them, and we have a lot of fun. You know, every weekend we get on these Zoom calls together, and there's different tiers, and they have different, you know, levels of what access they have. But I mean, we've learned so much in being more, you know, directly connected with our fans, and it's really turned out to be the way for us moving forward. And then Ryan and I have also started Framework, which is an artist development company, basically, where we produce and develop new artists. And Slaves to Humanity is a new band that's doing really well. They got added to KLOS, which is a major radio station here, without a record deal, and have had 2 hits already during the pandemic. So they're going on to, you know, we're finishing the record, but you're going to be hearing a lot about them in the next year. We also work with another band from Orange County called Your Favorite Color, which coincidentally has David Silvera, the drummer of Korn. His son is in the band, David Silvera Jr. They're another really cool band that we just released a new song by them. And so we're doing that. That's sort of like, you know, really the focus, well, at least for me, the focus is Julian-K, and then producing, mixing bands. Ryan, his focus is Julian-K, but he's also the singer in Edema. Yeah. He took over for Marty as the singer in Edema, and I'm producing that record.
Wow, no way. Amazing.
You know, it's basically kind of a Framework thing in that sense. So, yeah, so that became another production, mixing, all that kind of job for me as well, which is really cool. Yeah. So, you know, it's cool because it gives Ryan another outlet to, you know, do his thing, which I think is awesome.
That's incredible.
And they're great guys. We've known them for a very long time. They grew up together. They're all from Bakersfield. So long relationship there.
Amazing. I just love the fact that you and Ryan, after all these years, are still going strong and doing all these incredible projects together. It's so, yeah, it's awesome, man. Obviously you're both guitarists. Yeah. And so I was listening to a podcast with you on Spotify, and I heard a story about a double neck guitar. And I don't know if you're happy to share the story about apparently a double neck guitar that originally, I think, was it you approached Jackson about? And then there's like a story behind this, man. So if you're happy to, feel free to tell us a story about what happened with this crazy double neck guitar idea that you came up with.
Well, from when I really first started doing guitar professionally, like, you know, right around Rough Cut, you know, starting with Rough Cut, I was always really interested in having like unique things about my guitar, or guitars. And I was fortunate enough to be connected to Jackson in the very early days, Charbel Jackson. When they were still in San Dimas, which is the golden era of Charbel Jackson. And so initially I started doing like paint jobs where I was doing these like fighter plane paint jobs, which became a thing. They're still around. I mean, all kinds of guitars are painted this way. And I was the first person to do that. So it's pretty cool to see these like children of something I created when I was like 20 years old, you know? Yeah. And so I started, that was the beginning of it. And then I don't remember when it was, but for some weird reason, I guess probably because like Jimmy Page or Alex Lifeson, or trying to think of people who had double necks. But I always wanted a double neck. I just thought it was cool, you know? Cool. Yeah, like I just always wanted a double neck. And so I used to bug Grover about it all the time. I'd be like, Grover, come on, let's make a double neck. And he would always be like, "Ah, fuck off," like I don't want. We don't need no one wants a double neck.
Yeah.
So eventually, what ended up happening was I met Bernie Rico, who's BC Rich, basically.
Yeah.
And I met Bernie at a NAMM show, and oh man, I could kill myself for not having some of those early BC Riches. Like,
Really?
I didn't get those when I had the chance. I really wish I had like a Mockingbird or something now. But anyway, I had something better at the time, which was that he was like, look, he's like, we were talking, and I go, you guys make these like bitch double neck things or whatever. I go, would you ever like make me a double neck? And he was like, well, if Grover's not interested, then yeah, we could make you a double neck. And I was like, yes. So I started making this double neck with BC Rich.
Yeah.
And I think it was called like a Warlock or something. I have a picture of it somewhere. But I painted it like a British Harrier jump jet. That was the paint job of the time that I wanted to do for that guitar, because I was always picking all these different fighter planes, different eras and stuff.
Yeah.
My dad that I grew up with was a pilot in World War II. So I had this fascination with World War II and particularly fighter planes and planes because of him.
Yep.
So I figured this was a great artistic outlet to channel some of that. So we made this double neck, and it basically got to the point where it was going to be assembled. It was painted, and it went back to the factory, and they were going to assemble it. And BC Rich got broken into.
Oh, wow.
All the guitars were stolen, including my double neck.
Oh no.
Yeah, which was heartbreaking, not only for them, but for me. I was just like, oh my God, this is horrible. Like, I felt so bad for them too, that they had all these guitars stolen. So that was the end of my double neck again. Got shot down, and I'm like, I'm not going to go back there and ask them to make me another one. Like, that's just rude. So I think I'm not sure got wind of what happened. So he called me up one day, or actually Joanne called me up, who worked there, and Joanne called me, and she's like, Grover wants to talk to you. And I said, okay. So I get on the phone. He's like, okay, come down here and make your stupid double neck. That's what he said to me. He's like, come down here and make your stupid double neck. And I'm like, what? And he's like, I heard what happened. He's like, just come down here and let's make your stupid double neck. And I said, all right. So I went down there, and we had a meeting with Grover, and Mike Shannon is like the magic woodworking guy. And I don't know who else was in that meeting, probably Joanne, but and so we started trying to figure out what I was going to do. And that's where I came up with the idea of, I don't know, we took kind of the Strat bodies and we started laying them around. And I said, hey, do you have one with like a reverse headstock? And so we took a reverse headstock neck and then we got these bodies, started this together. And Mike's like, I think I can make that work. Like, we could probably connect these together. And so we started just doing all this stuff, and that's kind of how it came together. And then I painted it the same as I was going to paint the other guitar. Coincidentally, it was the same guy who was doing the paint jobs, I think. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know, but there were a couple of guys that were doing my paint jobs at that point. It was Glenn Matazel, I think, was one of them, and Dan. Who was the other guy? I don't know. I can't remember. But so anyway, we painted it the same. And when it got done, I mean, of course, it was amazing. And I was in the band Jailhouse at the time, and I was also endorsed by EMG, who makes guitar pickups. That's what I used to use. So I didn't get stuff for free, though, from them. I got like a discount, and the guitar needed like 6 pickups. So I think at the time it was kind of brutal, but I think it was like $300, even with my discount or something, to buy all those pickups, which, again, at that time I wasn't really making a lot of money. And, it's the 80s, $200 is, it's probably was my rent.
Yeah, completely.
For a month in my apartment, probably, So I scraped together my $300 and got my EMG pickups, and I played one show with Jailhouse with that guitar and those pickups, and it was stolen. The night we played 2 nights at the country club, which was huge. I mean, that place, it was like a few thousand people. And we were unsigned, but so we played 2 nights, played it the first night. Luckily we were videoing all of it, so I have video of it. And then we played the second night, and then the guitar disappeared, never to be seen again.
Oh, that's crazy. So that's literally that's 2 double neck guitars gone.
Mm-hmm.
That's mad.
So of course Grover made me another one, and then they did end up making it into a production model, which they did a very limited run of them. I think it was probably around 100 or something. So they did a lot of famous people played them, which I was super honored. I've seen pictures of like what's that guy? Adrian Young from Iron Maiden.
Wow, no way.
Yeah,
cool.
And God, I can't think. Something Healy, was it? I can't think of his name. He was a blind guitar player, and he played the guitar in his lap. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, not quite. I'll have to look him up, man.
Yeah, I can't think of his name right now. I don't think it was Joe Keeley. It was something Keeley or something, but he was blind, and he played the guitar in his lap, and he got one of my double necks, and he used to play that. That was like one of his main guitars, and it was insane to watch this guy play.
That's great.
He played it like this, you know, like hands, you know, like in his lap, and he was blind on top of it and just like ripped. And I was just like, wow. Someone like that, something that I helped create. Wow. That was cool. So that kind of began my, you know, this idea that I kind of knew how to make guitars, because Grover taught me all of that. He was the one, like, before I did the double neck, he was the one who would walk me around the factory and tell me how to pick the wood and tell me what all these different elements, how it all worked together. And then at the end of the day, my side of it was there was some voodoo involved, that some guitars just they had a magic, and he would always laugh at me when I'd said that. That I always said that there was like some kind of magic that would happen with some of them, and some of them didn't have it. But he taught me how to actually like put it together, you know, not physically make it, but the idea of like how it all works and why, you know, what different woods sounded like and all of that. So later on, of course, over the years, I really developed an idea of like what it was that I liked in guitars, you know, like what kind of woods and the pickups and you know, all that. And that helped me kind of design my signature models, like the ones that I did with Jackson, and then of course the one I did with Yamaha.
Yeah. Amazing. Have you ever tried, my friend actually built me a guitar, so we went around this was a couple of years ago, went around a timber yard together. So he built me this guitar with a Firebird body but with a Jazzmaster neck. But then we thought, oh fuck it, let's just like put one pickup in there. So we put a Seymour Duncan, but with, I don't know if you played around with the one, but a triple shot pickup, where you can switch it between a single coil, a P90, or turn it into a humbucker.
Oh, wow.
It's great, man. It's great fun. It
sounds
fun. Great.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I was lucky to meet like Larry DiMarzio, and like we worked together to create the pickups that ended up in my Jackson signature models. Like he wound custom pickups for me, and nice. I've been very fortunate to work with not only amazing producers and engineers and bandmates and friends and all of that, but I've also, you know, through the guitar industry and the amp industry and all of that, you know, the Dave Friedmans, the Larry DiMarzio, the Grover Jacksons, the Ken Parker, the Ned Steinberger. I mean, there's just so many people that have helped me along the way and that I've learned from. And, you know, been lucky enough to use their equipment and be sponsored by them and all that. I mean, it's to this day, there's still many, of course. But I've learned so much from all of them over the years too, you know?
Absolutely, man. That's so cool with the guitar stuff. So maybe before we take some questions as well, tell us a bit about the gear that you're using now. So what are some of your favorite plugins that you're using? What outboard stuff are you using? Are you hybrid? Are you in the box? How do you tend to work at the minute?
I'm completely in the box as far as mixing. Although I do have a thing that I call, well, you have plug-ins, and then I have what I call plug-outs.
Oh, right, okay.
And that's where I'm basically reamping, you know.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll get into that in a second. But as far as like recording gear, it really hasn't changed. I mean, I'm still using Pro Tools. I still have the same mic pre's that we have in all of our studios are the same. My vocal chain has always been a UA 6176 with a U47. That's that or an SM7, one or the other. Yeah. That's always been the vocal chain, unless I use like effects mics. Like I have a bullet mic. There's a great guy that makes these Placid audio mics. There's a copper phone, and there's this like Russian microphone. Those are like amazing effects vocal mics if you've never tried them. Super inexpensive, but really cool. And then, you know, an API channel strip, a Neve clone channel strip. And that's pretty much it. That's the same stuff. I use Dynaudio monitors. That's what I've been using since probably the mid 90s.
Okay.
Yeah, I like, I have Air 6s, which they don't make those anymore. Those have been my monitors for, I don't know, since they came out. I used to use NS10s as sort of my secondaries, but I've actually now switched to the MSP5s, the little versions. I find that they're fairly similar to my Dynes, and so if I get bored of listening on that, I can switch to those and still feel confident. Also, like we discussed earlier, I use the Audi's LCD-X. Those are the only headphones I'll mix on. Yep, like what you're wearing right there. Yep. I totally trust those. I mean, they don't, you know, the low end maybe isn't quite there as much as reality, but the clarity and what you can hear in those, like when we were discussing earlier about, you know, I can find clicks and pops, bad edits, noise, and other strange anomalies and things that I've never been able to hear on anything else ever, that you can hear on those headphones. So usually when I get towards the end of a mix, I'll put those on and just kind of make sure, like, you know, I'm listening for panning and spatializing, and, you know, again, if there's any anomalies that a lot of times I don't hear on my speakers, I can hear them perfectly on those, and I won't hear them anywhere else. It's really weird. And that's basically it, you know. When I do more acoustic stuff, like where I'm doing drums, I'm typically working in someone else's studio. I have slight preferences of, you know, what kind of mics I like to use and stuff, but mostly, you know, whatever's in-house, and then when we put the kit up, if it's sounding good, I'll go with it. If not, I'll say, let's try some different overheads. What else do you have, you know, or whatever. But most of the time, you know, a lot of these places, they have sounds dialed in. You walk in and it's like, it's almost like an instant drum sound. I mean, obviously it's up to me to make it all sound good in the mix, but, you know, I try to get, I'm pretty particular about recording. I do like to try to really get the sound from the beginning. I don't really like to fix it in the mix. I mean, I have to do it a lot when I'm mixing other people's stuff that I haven't recorded. But when I record, I really like to try to get the tone from the beginning, or at least have the option to reamp or what I call plug out. And when I was talking about plugins versus plug outs, sometimes I prefer to use outboard processors, whether it be amp modeling or pedals or whatever, or even rack mount gear and things like that. And most of my mixes, there's always some kind of plug out thing that happens, whatever that is, or reamping, you know, sometimes the bass, or sometimes guitars I'll augment with a plug out. Sometimes it'll be a plugin.
Yeah.
As far as plugins that I use, I mean, it's pretty much insanity. I have almost everything except what we discussed, the fab stuff, because I don't know, that just hasn't gotten on my plate yet, but it's already starting to get on my plate. But I have pretty much, you know, all the UAD stuff, a lot of waves, all the sound toys. Outside of that, I guess it gets a little more specific to a few things here and there that I like. But I guess because I've been doing this a while now, I do really have specific plugins for specific things. Like I have a list. It's like, okay, if I'm going to go and do the bass, you know, I have templates created, you know, mixed templates, right? So I already know, like, there's like 6 plugins that are already on there, and I know that one of those is going to work. Yeah. Or combination of it. It's not going to just be one. Most everything nowadays, you pretty much have to slather the plugins on, because like working in the analog world, you know, back, you know, when we used to, I could throw a, you know, 1176 on something and be like, done. There's the vocal sound. You know what I mean? Like you didn't have, now you got to throw like 3 of them on to make it sound like that, you know?
Absolutely. Are you a Pultec fan? Do you like Pultecs? And
I do. I love, with everything I do, whether it be visual to audio, I love mixing old and new. Yeah. So it can be the latest thing, but you know, there's always going to be Pultecs on something. Yeah. You can't beat the sound of a Pultec, you know. And when I'm tracking drums and things like that, you know, a lot of these places I work in, it's completely vintage gear. The drums are completely vintage. Every single microphone is vintage. Every piece of or gear, EQ, with the exception of probably like distressors, you know, stuff like that definitely gets used. But most of the gear is pretty much vintage, that it's being tracked through, and that doesn't really go for the rest of it. Like as far as guitars and things like that, I'm typically using either APIs or API clones or Neves or Neve clones. That's pretty much all I would ever track guitars or bass through. And like I already told you what my vocal chain is. I haven't changed that vocal chain in 20 years. That's been my vocal chain for every record I've done. Yeah. On my own. Now, of course, like Cold Chamber and things like that, I think we were probably just using vintage 47s with a Neve and probably an 1176 or whatever. Sure. Really not much different. Right. But I mean, that's pretty much been, like I said, you know, whether it be Dead by Sunrise or whatever, it's like everything that's my vocal chain.
That's incredible, man. Before we move on to the questions, thanks so much for that, Amir. When you're miking up guitar amps, so being a guitarist yourself, have you got any specific way that you like to mic up a cabinet? Is there any sort of positions that you go for?
Yep. It's very simple. I've been a 57 and a 421 guy since pretty much day one. Typically, they're on 2 separate speakers. That was pretty much my go-to guitar setup, with maybe a 67 in the room. Yeah. I always like room mics for guitar. So that was probably my go-to setup pretty much forever until the Royer 121 came out. Now most of the time it's a 57 and a 121. Yep. And sometimes I use, Royer makes a clip now where you can put both mics on one clip and you just go on one speaker. It sounds amazing. I mean, those are my, you know, the tried and true 57 and 421 thing. I mean, it's tough to beat that, but the 121 and the 57 is also, to me, in the same league, whether you use them separately or you just put it on one speaker. I usually experiment with that. depending on the person's tone, or if I'm creating the tone, you know, I might separate them, listen to them. You know, I obviously I try to phase align them when they're separated, whether it be a 421 or a 57. You know, I mean, after you've done it for a bazillion years, you can pretty much look and you know. And the funny thing is too, sometimes just that little bit of out of phaseness actually sounds good. Like it kind of focuses the tone a little bit. So, you know, I don't get crazy with it. I think I used to get more crazy, but, you know, I just put it up, and if it sounds good, I'm done. Like, I don't really mess too much with it. I think, you know, if I have more time, or, you know, I might put headphones on, and a lot of times really for me, it's all about getting the most brightness out of the sound, unless it's like a really bright sound.
Yeah.
But most of the time, I'm always fighting to get clarity and brightness out of the guitars.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'll put headphones on, turn the amp up, get some hiss out of the speakers, and just find the brightest spots. When we worked on the Dead by Sunrise record, I worked with Mike Plotnikoff, because we ended up doing a lot of the reamping and guitar stuff there. And he and I were just like on the same, we're like, yep, that's exactly how I do it. That's how you do it. Okay, cool.
Great.
You know, he does it exactly the way that I do it too. And so,
yeah,
I think that kind of justified what I'd been doing all those years, when I found somebody as amazing as Mike doing the same thing with the same two mics and whatever. I'm like, oh, okay, so I'm not crazy. Like this really is, it just sounds the best to me, always has. I mean, when I do little combo amps and stuff, I don't always use two mics. I might use a 409, like a vintage Sennheiser. I love that mic on guitar.
Yeah.
I might use that, or I might use the Royer 101.
Yep.
Which is in now, but it's kind of a little more clear version of the 121.
Yep.
That's an amazing mic. I don't know why they stopped making it. I love that on combo amps. But sometimes even on like a Vox AC30, I'll just put a 421 and a 57. I don't know. Mine works.
If it sounds good, it sounds good, man.
I have a few others that I like a Beyer M160. I like. That's a great guitar mic. It's also great on drums, and I think that's about it. Really, there's not, you know, it's not like some huge magic tricks. I think it's really that you got to have a good sound to begin with.
Yeah.
You know, the amp, the cab, whatever, you know, the guitar, pedals, all that kind of stuff has got to sound amazing. And then, you know, you just put a decent mic in front of it, it's going to sound awesome.
Completely. What about layering guitars as well? As I know with a lot of engineers, sometimes bands come in and bands are like, right, I want 50 guitars on a mix, and the engineers there go, no, I don't want to do this, you know, or do you go for a simple, you know, two guitars to the left, two to the right, or one to the left, two to the right?
Most of the time it's one guitar left and one guitar right. And if I do my job right, like I did on the Cold Chamber record, it sounds massive.
Yeah.
You know, do I occasionally augment that? Yes. Sometimes I'll, you know, add some power chords or this or that. But I honestly think, you know, we did a little bit of an experiment on the Dead by Sunrise record. We actually layered the guitars quite a lot, which is not something I normally do, but I kind of went along with it, and I regretted it after, to be honest.
Really?
Because I do feel like it's just not necessary. When you have a great sound and you just get it right up in front, I have some mixing tricks that I do where I sort of re-augment the guitars, and sometimes it's a plug-in, sometimes it's a plug-out.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just literally layering the guitars that I've reamped, because most of the time I reamp the guitar and the bass. Like, I don't track it live. Sometimes I do. Yeah. For the Edema stuff we did. But I also tracked multiple. We did do some multiple tracking, you know, alternates. Like when I do with Slaves to Humanity, that's all recorded with plugins initially, and then reamped later with like multiple tones. So of course it creates, you know, this option anxiety thing at
Yeah.
the end. But instead of like, you know, I think back in the day, people would take like 3 different amps, right?
Yeah.
And then they would mic all 3 amps up and record that at once, right? And it's tricky to do that because obviously there's a lot of phase issues. You're running through different amps. They could be wired differently. The speakers could be, you know, and then you've got all these different mics on all these different amps that you got to try to make work, right? It's not easy. But, you know, when you used to have a lot of time in the studio to do all that stuff, you could work it out, have multiple amps mic'd and whatever. What I do now, though, is instead of that is, you know, because I'm reamping most of the time, is I'll track, okay, the Marshall with this pedal. And then I'll track, oh, the Bogner with this pedal or no pedal, and the Friedman with no pedal. This other Marshall, you know, or whatever. So I literally have like 4 completely different sounds now. But the thing is, you're not moving the mics. So most likely it's all going to be in phase, right? Because you're not moving anything. Now, of course, the amps, the pedals and everything, they're, you know, sometimes you have to flip them. You have to play with it. It's tricky. But that's how I layer now, is that I'll take those layers and I'll say like, well, maybe the Marshall and the Bogner, that's really complementary. So it's almost like I had these amps out there, but now I have a lot more control over it, right? I don't have to worry about remiking. I don't have to worry about the phasing then. I'm just taking these layers and adding them in, right? And then sometimes I'll even use outboard amp simulators, or sometimes I use plugins.
Oh, wow, okay.
And layer it that way, right? So I'm not really limited that way. And it is a little, you know, maddening, a little bit of mad scientist stuff. But in the end, when I hear it, when I finally get it, and it's kind of like, fuck, this sounds good. You know, then that's the deal, you know, whenever he hears them, just fuck, that sounds really fucking good. And it takes away, you know, sometimes like we did with Edema, those guys already have great sounds. So I didn't have to reinvent the wheel. It's like, let's just capture your tones. I'm sure I'll do some augmenting or whatever in the mix, but this is your sound, and that's awesome. But like with Slaves to Humanity, I had to kind of create that sound. And so, you know, it's all fun.
Yeah, completely.
All this stuff, you know, but that's sort of my process as far as that, and that goes for bass as well. You know, I do a lot of reamping, and sometimes it's plug-ins, sometimes it's plug-outs. Yeah.
Incredible, man. With the bass as well. So do you tend to, I know some bands, they like to multi-layer the bass, especially if you're doing heavier projects like Edema or Julian-K, you know, those sorts of bands. Do you have I'm guessing maybe like a clean DI bass that you do, and then maybe some like a dirty bass as well, or is that how you tend to approach it?
Well, again, it just depends. I typically will record. I've been using the Avalon U5 as a DI for bass since it came out. So that's been a standard for me forever. And so I track typically through that first, and then, you know, it depends again on the project, you know, whether it's going down live, but I always have the DI, so I can always augment. I have some vintage bass amps. I have an old SVT and an old B15 Ampeg. I have a Gretsch Super Bass. That's amazing. That's a very unique bass amp. Yeah. And then I have like a Gallon Kruger. So, you know, I'm never really stuck. I can go back and say, okay, well, you know what? We did this, but it's like, I don't know if I love that.
Yeah, sure.
I can just plug it in to my vintage amps and just reamp it right away. And if I'm like, oh, I want distortion on this part, I put I have a vast number of pedals that I know already work great on bass.
Yeah.
Plug one of those in and lay it down. And then, you know, once I get back into the mix mode, I can decide whether I want that, or sometimes I'll just put a plug-in on whatever's there and just overdrive the fuck out of it, you know? Or run it through a Sans amp or whatever. I mean, the Sans amp that's, you know, every producer, mixer's almost, you know, it's like a Swiss Army knife. You can use that thing on anything.
That's great. It is so cool. Thanks so much for that, Amir. It's incredible just to hear your insight on the studio and how you work things. We've got loads of questions that have come through. If that's cool to ask you some questions as well, man, from YouTube and also from our Facebook community.
Great.
So I've got Nick. Hey, Nick. So Nick said, also a genius guitar innovator. I think that was a conversation that we were having early on about one of the guys that you work with building guitars. We've also got, let's have a look. So let's not forget the infamous Jackson Roswell Star Disruptor as well. So yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, those were, you know, I actually, Grover was not with the company anymore, but a guy named Donnie Wade was still there from the original lineup of the company. And when Orgy started happening, he approached me at a NAMM show and just said, look, we'd really love to have you come back, and you know, we'd love to have you create something here. And I said, well, I saw the Roswell, which was kind of a V at the time. And I said, well, I really love this guitar, but what if we made it into a star body? Like, you know, and he's like, wow, that's a great idea. So we went in and kind of tweaked it, because I always loved star bodies. It was one of my first Charvel guitar was a purple star body.
Nice.
Believe it or not. And I kind of wanted to go back to that. But I thought, what if we, you know, took this thing that you guys have already started, but kind of made it into this new thing? And then right around that same time, this color changing paint had emerged that these automakers were using on these like specialized cars. It was really expensive. This paint was like $300 for like this tiny little can. And I don't know who suggested that, but someone brought it to me and said, you know, what would you think if we, you know, painted, because I wanted it to be purple, but I wanted it to be different. And they came to me with this color changing paint. When I saw that, I was like, oh my God, like this chameleon paint, like how perfect. So, you know, we used it where, you know, it like morphs the color, and that was the beginning. And then at that point I said, well, I do have a sketch for this kind of crazy guitar that I've been kicking around for a while called a Disruptor. And they said, yeah, let's make it. And so, you know, I went back to Mike Shannon again. He was still there. And he was the one who also, I'm pretty sure, probably would have done the Roswell, that we would have worked that out together. And then we created the Disruptor. And I was supposed to, you know, this was supposed to be something they were going to produce in a limited version, and then also make a Japanese one that was like more mass produced.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Donnie left the company, and then the company got bought, or I don't know, it got weird, and it never got done. And so to this day, I basically own pretty much all of them. I have like, I don't know, 6 or 7 Disruptors. There's 1 7-string, and I guess, no, actually I probably have like 5, because one of them went to the Hard Rock in Munich. And then there was one that I had made for a friend of mine that he still has it. But yeah, there's none of them. There's a few copies I've seen floating around. There's been a couple people who've made a couple knockoffs.
Yeah.
Kind of annoying. I've been approached by some very good friends to like make them, but I'm just like, I just don't have it's time consuming doing guitars.
Yeah. Completely.
I would love to do it, but it's just like, you know, if someone comes to me, and I know that my friend Josh is somebody I've talked to, I don't know if he's watching, but Josh Miller, we've talked about this many times, of trying to figure out how we could maybe just form a little company and kind of make some.
Yeah. Sounds incredible. Watch this space. I'd love to see that happen, man. It'd be amazing.
Yeah.
So cool. Thanks, Amir. Thanks again for the question on there as well. So I've got Chris White, who said, hi, Amir. Hope all is well, mate.
Awesome.
So Chris on there. So I've got
Jeff Healy. Someone said Jeff Healy. He was the guy that had the double.
There you go.
I was saying Joe Healy. It's Jeff Healy.
Jeff Healy.
No, look him up. He's amazing. That guy was
Will
amazing.
do. That's great. So we've got the Intemperate Sons. So they're saying, as a producer mixer, what is the process to build up the sounds or a particular band?
Well, if I'm working with a band from the start to build a sound, it really starts with the songs and the arrangement, of course, first, because that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
And then once we get in the studio, it's kind of, you start to feel it out. I mean, when we did the Cold Chamber record, like Meigs is a great guitar player, but he really didn't have a great tone. And all the gear that we used pretty much was mine, including a vintage like 1960s gold top Les Paul that had P90s, which we tuned to B, which you wouldn't think would work.
No.
Because it has the most basic stop tailpiece.
Yeah.
But I was able to intonate it to work with heavier strings and tune it to B, and that is the sound. And they ended up having to use that and actually rented it from me for some of the later records because they couldn't really cop that sound without the guitar as well. But it was, my vintage modded Marshalls and all the pedals and all that. But it was something, we, just like Orgy and every Dead by Sunrise and Julian-K and all the bands that I work with, or that we work with, I really do create that from the beginning, like I find the sound and it's experimenting, whatever that is, the drum sound, the bass sound, the guitar sound, even the vocal sound, and, keyboards, and everything is really kind of thought out from the beginning. I create little music playlists sometimes called style councils, where I put music in that I say, like, I think, the guitar should sound like this, the synths should sound like this, and then that way everybody kind of gets it what kind of good for. It's like a style thing,
Yeah.
But there's a lot of thought that goes into every project that I work on. Particularly, I like every band to kind of have its own thing. I'm not one of those kind of producers, and this is no slight to those type of producers that just has a sound and then puts that sound on every band that he does. I've always preferred sort of the opposite approach of really helping the band find what is their sound and then working to create that for them so that they have their own thing, that I'm not putting my stamp on each thing, that every band, sounds like Orgy, or every band sounds like Cold Chamber or the Eels or whatever it is,
Yeah, completely.
I prefer that approach over the other. But, hey, a lot of those producers are very fucking successful. So there is something to be said. If you get a sound and it works, roll with it.
Completely. Yeah, absolutely. If it works, if people love it.
It worked for Mutt Lange,
Yeah.
I mean, that guy, wow, what a genius.
Absolutely. There's just so many incredible people out there that do this job. Some more questions for you here as well. Let's have a look. So is there more stuff you did with Chester anywhere? Asked Joshua.
There is some stuff. There wasn't a lot, honestly. We didn't have a lot of time to do what we did. And so there really wasn't a lot of like B material. Most of it we were just developing as A material. And if it wasn't good right away, it just never went anywhere. So really everything that's there is kind of there. I think there might be a couple of tracks. I know there's one. I'm pretty sure that has Chester's vocals on it that was fully done, but it never got finished, like mixed or whatever. I can't remember the name of it, but there is one outtake song from the Dead by Sunrise record that hopefully one day will see the light. There are some live recordings and acoustic recordings that we have that, really have never been put out or anything like that. But amazing. Yeah, I wish there was more. I mean, there probably is some stuff I might not remember.
You never know what one day you could literally kind of
you go back in there, and then all of a sudden you realize, holy shit, like he sang this whole song or whatever. Like, who knows? It
It's
could be.
incredible. Absolutely. Oh man, how amazing would that be if that happened? Incredible. Thanks, Amir. So
these two.
Great, nice one, man. I've got Nick. So Nick saying, can you tell us any stories regarding the design and creation of your signature guitars? So not only the Jacksons, but the various Yamaha AD6s. I remember years back a version of the guitar had lasers, apparently.
Yeah. Well, the whole Yamaha connection, funny enough, happened the day that I was working with Dave Friedman on my rack. There was a guy named Eric Goyriche, who's an amazing luthier. He was working at Yamaha, and he happened to be there at the time. And Dave's like, you guys should get together and do something, because Yamaha was kind of looking for artists to work together on. And I was intrigued by what he showed me, because he had sort of a baritone. They were going to do a drop tune guitar. And so we started working together immediately. And that's how my, this signature guitar that I ended up also creating a 7-string version for Ryan. And then my relationship with Yamaha, which was amazing. We did a lot of stuff together, and even some of my work there has carried on into some of their other designs over the years, some of the inlay ideas, some of the, there are little tweaks here and there. I see things and I'm like, yeah, that looks kind of like some of the stuff we were doing.
Yeah.
And that's cool. Like I said, they're like little children. I see later, little influences and stuff, and it kind of makes me, I feel good. Like, that's cool that I could have some hand in some of this stuff. But yeah, I mean, with Eric, we had to kind of tone it down a little bit, because Yamaha is a much more conservative company. And that's not a slight, it's a different type of company. And they were like, we can't do something. I had an idea for another guitar that's pretty out there. And they were just not ready for that. So I said, well, let's take a more conventional shape, like a Les Paul body or whatever, but let's tweak it. And that's what we ended up doing. And it ended up being I still use that guitar now. I use it for all our recordings. I tour with one. Unfortunately, I've had a couple of them stolen over the years. Yeah. I've had a lot of stuff stolen over the years. It sucks.
Sounds it. It's just bad luck. It's
a lot
crazy.
Of amps, and people, I guess they like what I do. They like, and a lot of this stuff you can't buy it, and people do shitty things and they steal. But yeah, I mean, I still tour with one of those guitars. It's a workhorse for me. I think it's one of the best baritone guitars you can get, period. I was really flattered. I saw a compliment from Ryan. God, what's his name? God, I'm so bad with names. He's a famous engineer. I think his name is Ryan something, but he had posted something on Gear Sluts, and he had one of my guitars, and it had mentioned that he thought it was like one of the best recording baritones. It's like the only baritone he ever uses to record with. I wish I could remember his name. He's a quite famous engineer. Right. It's kind of embarrassing. A much better engineer than I'm sure I'll ever be. But I was flattered that he gave the compliment to the guitar, and that he has used it, I guess, a lot, which was pretty cool.
That's so cool. Have you heard? We had a guest last week, David Kalmutsky, who was talking about the Squier baritone, and then the fact that is like $150 guitar, but all of a sudden it's like it's $1,000 or something ridiculous.
Yeah. It's crazy. I'm glad I bought mine, and I got one for Ryan a few years back when they were inexpensive, and they were like a few $100s or something. And there's this band called Loathe out of the UK, I think, and they've now made these guitars completely collectible, and people have just gone nuts over them. But it's funny. I mean, they're really good guitars.
Yeah.
I mean, Fender really knocked it out of the park with these Squire. They were, meant to be inexpensive, but now they're like, well over $1,000 now. If you want to get one, they're like $1,200, $1,500 now. Because I think mainly because of this band Loathe. I mean, that band, I'm sure you must have heard them, but like
yeah.
our work is just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Absolutely. I just love the fact as well that there's still so many great new and newish bands still coming out at the minute as well. But yeah, Loathe is such a great band, man. You're absolutely right. So thanks again, Amir. So we've got another question for you here, man. So Demon, if I'm pronounced that correctly. So Demon's asking, so how many GK pickups have you gone through over the years?
None of them. Well, I can't say now because I haven't tried any of them lately, but I know with the older GR stuff, like the 707 guitars, some of the pickups in those, I think, went out over the years, and I haven't used them in years, so it's hard to know if they're still working or not. But the other ones, I never had any issues with them going out. They were pretty consistent. I mean, the funny thing was I was really kind of doing something you really shouldn't be doing with them, and that was tuning down. They don't track very well to begin with, but then when you tune down, it's like 10 times worse. But because I was using heavier strings, it creates a bigger picture for the pickup to pick up. So it kind of counterbalanced it in a way, even though the string became more floppy.
Sure.
By putting a bigger string on it, the pickup could still kind of see it, right? So it was just coincidental that it kind of worked. But I also really loved playing off the fact that they didn't work well. And there's tons of sounds on those Orgy records that's literally my guitar sense just glitching. Where it just, and it's like, oh my God, that was rad. So glad I had record on, So it was kind of unpredictable, but I also managed to learn, for the things that were a little more rhythmic, because I was writing them with it, I could control it. It wasn't like an afterthought of, writing all these parts and then, oh my God, I got to play it on the thing. I was writing these ideas or doing these ideas with it. So encompassing the limitations, but also knowing that, they were a little bit latent. So if I was, having to pick something and stay in time, I had to kind of learn how to play on top to, because naturally you kind of want to play a little behind.
Sure.
It tends to sound a bit better if you're just, slightly behind. They call it the pocket, right?
Yeah.
But with that, I had to unnaturally play on it to keep it in time, So that was a bit weird. But I got used to it, and I made it work. And then at the same time, took advantage of the anomalies that were created by it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's insane. Thanks, Emma. Thanks for that info. So Demon's got another question as well. So do you have Demon? Oh, sorry. This is me. This is my terrible mispronunciation.
No, that's okay.
Demon says that Demon's asking a question. So do you have any advice for independent engineers who are just getting started? Great question.
Well, yeah. I mean, again, I think experience. It's just stumbling around and figuring it out, a lot. I mean, yes, you can learn. I mean, nowadays you can get a free education online on YouTube, right? I mean, watch as many videos about people, that you admire that do this type of stuff. I mean, it's a free education right there online. But outside of that, it's experiment, try stuff, get in there and don't be afraid to make mistakes, because sometimes those mistakes are the magic. Embrace them.
Completely. That's great advice. Thanks, Amir. That's absolutely amazing. Okay, so I've got a couple more questions for you here. So I've got Mike Vera. Hey, Mike. Any chance to see your Jackson disruptor in a JK video?
I actually did use the 7-string disruptor in the Shut Down Your Soul video.
Ah, okay.
Maybe you didn't notice.
No, maybe needs to rewatch.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
So Joshua Hilton said, so Mike Vera is making a cameo in the photo Voltaire video, apparently, if that's right.
The what?
Apparently saying so Mike Vera is making a cameo. I don't know.
Oh, no. Josh said that's true. I actually used a disruptor in the photo Voltaire video as well.
Right.
Yeah. You don't see it that much, but it's in there.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thanks, Amir. So I've got Simon. So Simon says, great interview, Amir. You're looking great. And thanks for being so open. Yeah, and thanks for the stories that you've shared with us, man. It's been lovely.
Simon. These are a lot of these people are on our Patreon. These are like hardcore supporters and good friends now. So thanks. Hey, thanks for everybody listening in and watching today.
Absolutely. It's so great. It's just so wonderful, Amir, as well. The fact that, you've got this amazing family that you've created as well for Julian-K. It's wonderful, man. It's absolutely wonderful to see all your support.
It's a symbiotic relationship. We're all just helping each other in different ways. It's really interesting. We learn so much from all the people that follow us, and I hope that they learn cool stuff from us too.
So it's so wonderful as well with community as well, like with what you've got going on, and PMFCs we're here because of community as well. So community on the internet, it's mind-blowing. So someone's also asked, so is purple your favorite guitar color?
No, actually it's not. If I had my way, I would have an electric blue guitar.
Oh, nice.
I almost did that. I wanted a really almost neon blue guitar. That was I was gonna do a Yamaha like that, and I don't know why, with black hardware. I would like that.
Amazing.
I guess I can do that at some point.
Yeah, you should do it, man. That'd be insane. Absolutely do it. So we've got Nick. So Nick says your Orgy guitar rig and tone was so far ahead of its time. Any consideration of using it again for current Julian-K? Chances are it would still sound futuristic now in 2021.
Well, thank you, Nick. I have done some stuff with it. We did do some stuff, I think, on the last record on Harmonic Disruptor. I don't know. I haven't really, I guess because I've gotten so used to doing so many different things without it, that I kind of know how to do all that without it, I guess, now. So sometimes I just don't need it anymore, and I can create some of those sounds relatively easy. But, Ryan and I have talked about it many times, how fun it would be to just break them out and just have some fun with them. Just whether we record anything or not. And I wouldn't doubt that will probably happen at some point. That we do need to pull the rigs out of mothballs.
Completely, man. To do it, absolutely. Thanks, Amir. So Simon's asking as well, so who wrote the lyrics on Fire?
It would be Chester.
Yeah. Completely amazing. I love that song. I think, to be fair, I'll be honest, it's my favorite. I love the album, but that is my favorite song on the album.
Awesome. Well, it's funny because, like I said, there were a lot of politics involved in that, and we had to engage with Howard Benson to basically have the record come out, honestly. Wow. Not that he was the only choice. We were presented with other producers to sort of oversee what was going, although I had already, we'd already done all the work, really. The songs were all pretty much written. But I completely lost track of what was the question again? Sorry.
No, it's cool, man. You were talking
about how my cold. I have a cold right now, and it's just like the brain is not.
Oh, dude,
it's not clicking. It's not clicking like it should be. You know what I mean? You get this kind of disconnect.
I don't know if they call it the same thing in the States, but over here in the UK, it's called man flu. Apparently.
I got sidetracked. What was the question again? Sorry.
Yeah,
you
it's just
talking
saying
about fire, or you were talking about fire.
Fire, yeah, and you were talking about Howard Benson as well.
Yes, and well, basically at the end of the project, he didn't care about the album order. So because I do actually, I'm kind of old school that way. I do like to really lay the record out so that it plays like a record.
Sure.
And he didn't care. He said it didn't matter. So I said, okay, well then I'm gonna, make up the album order. And I felt that Fire should be first. I thought it was a great way to open the record, that it sort of opened the door to what the album was going to be. And then of course the end of the record is, I think it's The Darkness, right?
Yeah.
And I thought that was a great way to kind of end the record. So yeah, it's interesting to me that, you like that song so much. I did feel that it was a strong enough song to start the record, although I don't think anybody there gave a shit about it, like label wise or whatever. I honestly really felt there were different songs that should have been singles. Unfortunately, I was not allowed an opinion in that, which is really unfortunate, in my opinion. But I felt that there were other songs that I really would have liked to seen push, like Too Late and let's see, my brain's just not working very well today.
No, dude, it's cool.
I need to open it up and take a look. But I mean, when they first told me that Crawl Back In was the single, I was kind of like, I don't know about that. Like I honestly didn't really. I mean, I get it to some degree.
Yeah.
There's so many like stronger songs. Inside of Me was always one that I really felt should have been. I mean, I thought, like, I'm looking at it now, like Too Late, I thought should be a single. Let Down, I think everybody knew was a single. There was no doubt in my mind about that. But Inside Me and also Into You. And it's funny because I'm looking right now on Spotify, and when you look at the first 5 songs that are up here, Too Late is the #1 song. And we never even made a video or promoted that as a single. So I wasn't wrong.
No, you're right. Yeah, completely.
And Let Down is second. That's not surprising. But look what's third, Inside of Me. So those 3 songs are all above Crawl Back In.
Yeah.
Which was an actual single that was worked. And then Into You is #5. And I'm like, okay, so I'm not crazy. I suck, honestly. I'm obviously being very honest and open about that whole thing. And, it didn't really go the way that in the end, I think all of us really wanted it to go. I mean, we're happy that it got released. I mean, there were threats that it wouldn't.
Really?
Yeah.
No way.
Oh yeah. And that we would be kicked out of the project. That, it's totally shitty. But Chester stuck up for us. And then, in the end, there were compromises made that we had to go along with. And, look, it's still a good record.
Dude.
And there were things that got brought to it, by Howard Benson and, the team, Mike and everybody that we worked together on. There was still a lot of great stuff, but I kind of had a different vision. I wanted the record to be a bit more raw. I feel it came out a little too polished and homogenized in some ways. Even Chester, to me, sounds a little bit homogenized, and I would have preferred to keep it more raw and a little harder, a little tougher, and the songs were there. There were great songs, and it just, I don't know. Dude, maybe one day, maybe one day we'll get to reinterpret the record or something. Go back to our original vision. I mean, we have some amazing demos.
Yeah.
That no one's ever heard, just the raw demos that we did. There's definitely some really cool stuff there. I listened to them maybe 6 months ago, and I was really surprised because there was more attitude there. The record definitely got a bit homogenized in the process, and I didn't want that to happen. And unfortunately, like I said, I didn't really get a chance. You know, Chester was kind of in the middle, unfortunately, and he did everything he could to, you know, make everything be cool.
Yeah.
But I wish I could have pushed. I wish I could have commented on the mixes. I wasn't even allowed to comment on the mixes.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah, I know. Crazy, right?
Oh, it's nuts. And to say it's like,
And again, this was not Chester's fault. This had nothing to
no.
do with Linkin Park or any of that. It's all her ABS. Yep.
Yeah, it's just crazy. Absolutely crazy to think about. But however, with to me though, man, I know I keep going back to Fire, but it's just like maybe it's because I'm a massive, you know, U2 fan, and I love Streets Have No Name.
Yeah.
That to me is like one of the ultimate songs. But I hear that like dotted, I don't know if it's a dotted eighth delay that you've got on there on that guitar.
Yeah.
But to me, I just love dotted eighth guitar. So it just lifts the whole song.
It obviously shows how much I love The Edge. I mean, The Edge is such a, you know, he's created his own path.
Yeah.
And I admire him in many different ways. I love that he's a guitar player that uses effects to create music, you know, almost like the, you know, Robert Fripp or Adrian Belew back in the day, that a lot of his stuff is driven by effects, especially delays. How I came up with that idea of that, but you know, I don't know. But it just, I started doing it and it was just like, wow, that's, I don't know, it just worked for that song, you know, to really kind of pop kind of an Edge feel, basically. And one of my approaches for that whole record, as far as like lead guitar, basically, there were things that I did on that record where I was like, I literally had a concept and I'm like, you know, some of these songs I'm like, I'm just gonna, you know, like Crawl Back In or whatever was just a completely improv solo, just a jam, basically, you know. But like the solo in Too Late, I had this idea, a concept before I did it, and I was like, I want to do a solo. I always wanted to do a solo where it's all just harmonics on the guitar, because I'm a big fan of Alex Lifeson from Rush. And he used to do a lot of, you know, harmonic stuff. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool to just do a solo that's just harmonics? And because the song is such a beautiful song, I didn't really want to like rip into a lead or something, you know? So it worked out perfectly. And I created the solo just doing harmonics. And then there's another song, I think it's, I don't know if it's Condemned or... There's another song where I was like, I'm not going to play really any notes. I'm going to play chords. The solo is going to be almost rockabilly. Like it's all just, every part of it is two strings, like a chord, right? Like whatever. So the entire solo is chords. Like little, you know, I don't know what you call it. Not, I guess like a triad or something like that, right? Where it's just few notes. Very kind of rockabilly kind of approach. And there was always a little bit of this like punk rockabilly thing to Chester's upbeat songs. Like he had this kind of punk background for some reason. He loved that kind of stuff. And yeah, so it kind of drove me to do some different things. You know, it wasn't really about like shredding on that record, although there's a couple that kind of shred, but more melodic stuff and just trying stuff. And again, it was like, you know, Chester really gave me free reign. The band gave me free reign to really try stuff. And I love doing that kind of stuff because it's a challenge. It's like I get this concept in my head that I want to try something. And as long as it fits the song, of course, the song always drives everything. That's obviously a hugely important concept, is, you know, whatever the song is saying to you, that, you know, whether it be a vocal, lyrics, music, sound, guitar solo, sax solo, whatever, you know, it's all being driven by the song. And so at the root of it, that's there, but then something will pop into my head that, oh, I want to play slide guitar on this, or I want to, you know, I did a slide solo on Give Me Your Name, or not just a solo, but the whole song has slide guitar throughout the whole thing. I think I'm trying to think. What's the other song I'm thinking of where it's kind of a more melodic solo? But yeah, I mean, it was fun, and Chester really, allowed me to kind of do whatever I wanted. Walking in Circles, that's one where it's kind of a melodic solo. It's got little shreddy bits, but kind of harkens back to my Michael Schenker school of soloing or whatever.
Nice.
I really got to do a lot of stuff, and obviously the guitar tones were meant to be just ballsy, powerful, in your face. The electronics were tamed somewhat, but we weren't afraid to have a little bit of program and all that. I mean, in Park a lot of things. So it wasn't, out of line or anything, but
yeah,
and just what a cool record.
I couldn't agree more. Absolutely couldn't agree
I'm very
more.
proud of it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I just like, as a fan, before I listened to the stream back when it came out. Was it 2009 when it came out? What year did that album come out?
So.
Yeah.
The Julian-K record and that kind of came. We ended up, clearing all the bullshit, and like both records kind of ended up landing around the same time. It's crazy. It was a very, very crazy time.
Oh man, thanks so much, Amir. Thanks so much for sharing, man. Really appreciate that.
Of course.
Okay, so we've got a couple more questions for you, sir. So let's have a look. So we've got Sean Bond. So just want to say, awesome interview and really interesting. So thanks, Sean. Really appreciate that. Thanks a lot, man.
I mean, we're
really
like
cool.
we're almost heading towards 3 hours.
This might be the longest one that we've done so far, Amir. I really
geez.
appreciate your time here.
Well, maybe
really
maybe it's time to wrap her up.
Wrap her up, absolutely. A couple of last quick ones for you, sir. So we've got so Johnny says, do you remember the snare drum used on the first Cold Chamber album?
That's a good question, actually. We used to work with the drum doctor, Ross. He is amazing. I mean, that guy's got an insane collection of drums. I remember we used I think it was like oh my God, what was that thing made out of? Funny enough, for that Halo Friendly song, we used a really weird snare on that.
Yeah.
It's like made out of like stainless steel or something weird. It was a very interesting snare. But the Cold Chamber stuff, I think we kind of we were probably into kind of piccolo kind of snares. It wasn't like a real deep snare. It was probably, I'm guessing, I don't remember, but it was probably like a brass snare that was probably not too deep. Was it a Noble and Cooley, or God, I don't remember. It was something, I feel like it was something a little weird.
Yeah.
That wasn't super standard at the time. And it was definitely it was not a deep snare. It was definitely something, we were kind of into that whole pingy kind of thing, Korn, and everybody, was kind of into that thing. It wasn't really about this like Fleetwood Mac, like, or AC/DC, I love, that's my favorite kind of snare sound.
Yeah.
I love those like deep kind of thuddy, 70s kind of snares. But I also love like weird pingy stuff, like this band that I've been mixing, the Intemperate Sons, out of Texas. The drummer's got a concrete snare, I think.
What?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. He'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's like a concrete snare or something. It's really interesting sounding.
That's amazing.
Great. I mean, you have to listen to their stuff. They've got some of their stuff out right now. So
yeah, check it out, man. That's
snare
great.
sounds amazing.
Cool. Thanks, Amir. No, but I remember my dad's a drummer, but my dad, he had aluminium drumsticks. And I always used to think, good grief, you must kill your drums with aluminium drumsticks.
Yeah,
but I don't know. It's mad. So we've got a couple of last bits for you. So talk about your badass Eastwood.
Oh, I've got a couple. I have a baritone guitar that I bought Eastwood's a very interesting company because they crowdfund their designs, which is fucking genius.
Yeah.
So the baritone was crowdfunded, relatively inexpensive guitars, came out great, sounds great. It looks kind of like an old Mosrite guitar, like an old Ventures, the band The Ventures. It's like an old surf guitar, I guess. It's all black. And then I also have the Peter Hook signature 6-string bass.
Yeah.
And that, it's just amazing. It's so fun. That thing is so fun to play.
Amazing. Thanks, Amir. I appreciate that, man.
Yeah.
So we've got Simon saying, glad I got the fire lyrics tattooed. So poignant now in hindsight. Looking forward to breaking out of Ashes Down on Patreon.
Yeah. Yeah. We're gonna do that on Patreon. We're gonna on a special anniversary, I think we're gonna go through and maybe literally open up some of these old sessions if we can get them to work. I'm sure you can imagine that.
Yeah.
That's why I have a foo, Anthony Valsic, who's a part of Julian-K and has been one of my best friends for I don't know how many years now. He's an amazing producer engineer in his own right, has worked with, Skinny Puppy and was part of the whole network label thing back when all the industrial music was starting. He's extremely talented. He handles a lot of the behind the scenes technical stuff, and he actually has an old computer that's just kind of like a time machine so that we can hopefully open up some of these sessions, consolidate them, and with whatever weird plugins we were using or whatever, and then we can bring them into fresh sessions and kind of open them up and kind of pose the process of them making and I think we're planning on doing that on some sort of special DBS anniversary. It's just one of a bunch of things that we do on Patreon, so everybody should get over there. And I mean, we've got tiers from $5 to $500, and we've got people on all those tiers. It's amazing. We're super grateful for that.
Incredible, man. Thanks so much, Amir. That's absolutely wonderful to hear, man. So we've got a couple last bits. So we've got Mike Vera. So how JK was involved to create This Machine to the Sonic Adventure song?
Yeah, that was really early when Ryan and I were just starting to do Julian-K. I met the music supervisor for the Sega games, June, and he does all the music basically for all the Sega games, and he was a big Rough Cut fan. And I was in Orgy and all of that, and he'd been a fan of that, and he just said, hey, I'd love to hire you to just create a song for this new Sonic game. And so we had to kind of stick with some lyrics. I basically kind of did the music, and then I brought Ryan in, and we kind of finessed the vocals, and there were some key words we had to use. So it's it's kind of cheesy when you listen to it, but it's all very game specific. So
completely.
It all makes sense. And it was like, it was cool, and we did it, and it ended up being huge. I mean, we have like over 1 million plays on that song on Spotify. It's like one of our biggest songs. And there's just like a whole cult following. We ended up playing a Sega convention and all of that because of it when we went to the UK. And, we have this cult following that came over from all the Sega games. And we did another theme for Shadow the Hedgehog as well. And that one's done, it's, I think, at 500,000 plays or something like that as well, streams. But it's been, they sold tons of records. I think they're now releasing it all on vinyl. Those songs are hugely popular, and it was really fun to be at that convention and meet all these kids, and they know every word, and they sing the songs back to you, and like it's really funny. It's cool. I mean, it was an interesting thing that just sort of landed. It's a part of our legacy now.
Incredible. Thanks, Amir. Really appreciate that, man. So Arthur's just said as well, so Amir, do you use VST synths? And if yes, could you recommend why? Oh, recommend any, sorry.
Yeah, the Arturia collection is insanely good. That would
Oh yeah, it's
probably
great.
be my first choice of recommendations. Most of the time, I mean, sometimes I use it here and there. I'm not afraid to use plugins because sometimes their limitations are useful. Other times, using the real thing or an analog synth, it's just so big and so fat sounding, and that's you're trying to fill, maybe the low end or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's hard to replicate that with the plugin. But sometimes, like I said, you don't need it to be so massive, and the plugins tend to kind of fit in when you build this big track and got massive guitars and massive drums. And sometimes the plugins are better because they don't take up as much space. They definitely have a little. All plugins to me, whether it be amp modeling or synths or whatever, they all sort of have this weird haziness to them. Like the focus of recording real instruments is not present in plugins, in my opinion. And sometimes it doesn't matter. I mean, when you're doing electronic music, it doesn't matter. But when you start throwing real drums and real guitars and real bass and a lot of vocals, and everything really has to fight to get into those spaces, right? In the frequencies. And so sometimes plugins for synths are great because they kind of just fit in a nice little place. You don't have to filter them or anything. And, like I said, that Arturia collection's amazing. That stuff sounds pretty damn close to the real thing. But, there's always something to just sitting down to that gear that you're familiar with and twiddling the knobs and actually playing the keyboard. For me, creating that way is, I'm not really interested generally in creating with plugins. It just doesn't interest me. Maybe I'm spoiled. I don't know.
No, it's all right.
It doesn't mean that you can't. I mean, there's laptop producers out here that make way bigger records than anything I've ever done. So, it's whatever works,
Completely. Think of someone like Skrillex as well. What Skrillex does, man, it's just it's insane what that dude does with a laptop.
Or even Deadmau5. Joel's.
Oh, Deadmau5,
I've been friends with Joel since before anybody even knew who Deadmau5 was, and he, was doing remixes for Julian-K that he hates, by the way.
Oh, really?
But I was with him. I remember hanging out with him when he did Ghost and stuff, which he did on his laptop. And I remember him playing that for me before it came out. And I was just like, wow, I couldn't believe, like, it became, I think it's still probably his biggest hit. And that, I'm pretty sure he like purposely entirely did it on his laptop, which at that time was kind of a little more of a feat than, of course, now. And he's just so extremely talented, and that guy can whip out a track, like nobody's business.
Absolutely.
I actually learned a lot from him too. I had a lot of insight into that world through watching him become what he became and still is, but I mean, I was just like, wow, I can't believe this. You did this all on your laptop. Like, wow, that's mind-blowing. And now you see a lot of these guys like Tame Impala. I don't know what his name is, but I mean, this guy, I'm pretty sure he does it all himself. Those are some amazing records. He plays, but he plays stuff like he uses a lot of vintage gear, and he'll like play the drums, and he does. I mean, that's just like, that's setting the bar. I'm happy when I can like do music for a song by myself, but write the words and then do all the production, recording, everything. It's just like, wow, that's
mental.
That's talent. That's talent. Like Brandon from the Annex, like that guy has that kind of talent where he can just he does everything from top to bottom. It's like, wow,
insane. Absolutely insane. Amir, thank you so much for your time today, and thanks for everyone's questions as well. So
yeah, of course.
To all your fans and to everyone on PMFC as well. I've got one last question from me before you go.
Okay.
And you're the first guitarist I'm going to ask this question to as well, and synth player for that matter. On Equipboard, how true is your equipboard.com? Is it correct with all the guitars that are on there on equipboard.com and all the amplifiers and effects, or is there any that are slightly off or skew with?
Is that the one that shows my Orgy rig?
Yeah, like literally it shows like all your guitars, it shows all your amplifiers, your effects.
I haven't looked at it lately, but I know there was a website that had like guitar rigs that showed like my Orgy rig, and that was 100% correct because
right, great.
Yeah, I gave them all that information. Like that was 100% my live rig basically, and that's also what I used in the studio. I mean, basically, once I created that rig, that went with me everywhere, and that's what I used in the studio. So I haven't looked at that other one. You'll have to send me the link, and I can
I'll do that, man.
if that's up to date or what. But yeah,
absolutely. Just go onto the admin page and just have a quick word with them and see if you need any updates on there.
Yeah.
Incredible. Amir, feel free to hang for another minute or so. I appreciate you've given so much of your time today. I'm absolutely honored and humbled to hang out with you today, man. And
thank you for having me. Thanks for all who tuned in today. And that was fun. I mean, this is probably the longest interview I've ever done. So I know there's a lot of ground to cover.
Absolutely.
But I'm good.
Thank you so much today, man. Really appreciate it. Feel free to hang backstage just for a moment. And thanks to everyone. And hope you have a great day. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Cheers. Thanks.